In 586 BC, the most brutal siege in ancient history was about to change the course of human civilization forever, and it all began with a dream that a pagan king couldn't understand. This is the moment when the God of Israel would use the mightiest empire on earth to fulfill his ancient prophecies, setting in motion events that would echo through eternity. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you'll journey through the complete biblical narrative of Babylon, from Nimrod's rebellious tower to Nebuchadnezzar's golden image, from Daniel in the lion's den to the mysterious writing on Belshazzar's wall. Every conquest, every prophecy, every divine intervention that shaped this legendary empire awaits you in the pages of Scripture. But before you settle in, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means we can continue producing more content to help you unwind or learn something new. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here, so you can meet and connect with like-minded folks from around the world. So without further ado, let's get started with today's story, shall we? In the beginning, there was a river. Long before cities rose from dust, before kings wore crowns of gold, there was water. Two rivers carved their way through an endless desert, creating something magical. The Tigris and Euphrates flowed like twin serpents through barren land, carrying life in their muddy embrace. Picture this ancient world. No roads, no walls, no temples reaching toward heaven, just water moving slowly through sand and stone, season after season, century after century. The rivers brought more than moisture. They carried dreams of what could be. Where these waters touched the earth, something stirred. Plants pushed through soil that had never known growth. Animals came to drink, then stayed. Gradually, people followed the herds, following the promise of green things growing where only brown had been before. The land between the rivers had a name that would echo through time, Mesopotamia. It means between the rivers in the old tongue. Simple words for a place that would birth civilization itself. Here, in this cradle of flowing water, humanity would take its first steps towards cities, laws, and stories written in stone. The floods came each spring like clockwork. Waters would rise, spill over banks, and spread across the flat plain. When they receded, they left behind rich, dark soil, a gift from distant mountains where the rivers began their journey. This mud held magic. Seeds planted here would grow tall and strong. Early people learned to read the waters. They watched the sky, felt the wind, and knew when the floods would come. They built their first shelters on higher ground, waiting for the waters to give them their yearly blessing. Then they would wade into the soft mud, scattering seeds that would become their harvest. The rivers taught them patience. Water moves slowly, but it never stops. It finds its way around obstacles, carves new paths when old ones fail. The people learned to think like water. Persistent, adaptable, always flowing toward their goals. Generation after generation, families returned to the same spots along the riverbanks. They began to see patterns in the land, in the seasons, in the way water behaved. This knowledge became their first treasure, passed down through stories told by firelight, through songs hummed while planting seeds. Time moved like the rivers themselves, steady, unhurried, always forward. The people grew in number and wisdom. They learned to work together, to share the bounty of the floods, to build their lives around the rhythm of rising and falling waters. Children played in the shallows while their parents worked the fertile fields. They splashed and laughed, unaware they were living at the beginning of something extraordinary. Their games in the mud were preparation for the great works their descendants would build. Temples and palaces, gardens and towers that would touch the clouds. The desert watched and waited. Beyond the green strips along the rivers, vast emptiness stretched to every horizon. But the people had found their paradise in this narrow band of life. They had water, soil, and sky. What more could they need? At night, when work was done and families gathered around small fires, the elders would tell stories. They spoke of the rivers as gods, of the floods as divine gifts, of their small patch of green as sacred ground. These stories would grow and change, but their heart would remain the same. Gratitude for water in a thirsty land. The stars above reflected in the slow-moving rivers, creating a second sky below. The people learned to read these night patterns too, marking time by the movements of bright points of light. The heavens and the waters became their first books, teaching them about cycles, about order, about the beauty of things that return again and again. In this peaceful place between flowing waters under endless sky, the first seeds of something great were planted. Not just the seeds of grain that would feed bodies, but the seeds of ideas that would feed souls. The rivers had given them life. Soon they would give life to cities, to laws, to stories that would outlast the very stones they would learn to carve. The water flowed on, carrying their dreams toward the sea, toward tomorrow, toward a future bright with possibility. From Sumer to Akkad, the rivers kept their promise. Where water touched earth, life bloomed. Small settlements grew into villages, villages into towns. People learned to shape clay into bowls, to weave reeds into baskets, to make tools that helped them tame the wild land. In the south, where the rivers slowed and spread through marshes, a remarkable people emerged. They called themselves the Sumerians, and they would teach the world how to live together in cities. Their story begins with mud. The same rich clay that fed their crops became the foundation of their civilization. The Sumerians looked at the flat landscape and saw possibility. They dug channels to guide water where they wanted it to go. They built raised platforms to lift their homes above the floods. Most importantly, they learned to work together on projects too big for any one family to complete alone. Their first cities rose like islands from the marshland. Uruk, Lagash, names that whisper of ancient grandeur even now. Each city was a miracle of cooperation, thousands of people choosing to live and work together for the common good. They built walls for protection, temples for their gods, and markets where farmers and craftsmen could trade their goods. At the heart of each city stood a ziggurat, a massive step tower that climbed toward heaven. These weren't just buildings, they were prayers made of brick and mortar. The Sumerians believed their gods lived in the sky, and the ziggurats were stairways for divine visits to earth. The most amazing innovation came from their need to keep records. When cities grew large, people needed to track who owned what, who owed whom, and how much grain was stored for lean times. The Sumerians pressed wedge-shaped marks into soft clay tablets, creating the world's first writing system. They called it cuneiform, and it would preserve their thoughts for thousands of years. These clay tablets tell wonderful stories. Some record business deals and tax payments, the practical stuff of daily life. Others preserve epic tales of heroes and gods, of floods and battles, of love and loss. The Sumerians were the first people to write down their dreams and make them permanent. Their cities buzzed with activity. Potters spun clay into beautiful vessels. Weavers created textiles that would be traded across continents. Metal workers learned to combine copper and tin to make bronze stronger than either metal alone. The Sumerians were inventors, artists, and dreamers all at once. They also gave the world its first schools. Young scribes would sit for hours practicing their cuneiform letters on clay tablets. They learned math, literature, and the proper way to conduct business. Education was the key to advancement in Sumerian society, and knowledge was treasured above gold. But the Sumerians were not alone in Mesopotamia. To the north, Semitic peoples had settled along the rivers, learning from their southern neighbors while developing their own traditions. The most successful of these northern groups were the Akkadians, led by a king whose name still echoes with power, Sargon. Sargon of Akkad was born in humble circumstances, but he dreamed of greatness. Legend says he was found as a baby floating in a basket on the river, rescued and raised by a gardener. Whether this story is true or not, it captures something important about Sargon. He was a man who rose from nothing to reshape the world. Around 2334 BC, Sargon conquered the Sumerian cities one by one, creating history's first true empire. He united the north and south under Akkadian rule, spreading his language and customs throughout Mesopotamia. For the first time, the land between the rivers was ruled by a single king. The Akkadian Empire brought new energy to the ancient world. Sargon's armies marched beyond Mesopotamia, carrying their culture to distant lands. Trade routes stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Ideas flowed as freely as goods, creating a rich mix of traditions and innovations. Sargon's capital, Akkad, became a legend in its own right. Though archaeologists have never found its exact location, ancient texts describe it as a city of wonders with palaces and temples that rivaled anything the world had ever seen. It was a melting pot where Sumerian wisdom met Akkadian ambition. The empire lasted for over 150 years, with Sargon's descendants ruling from their magnificent capital. They built roads, standardized weights and measures, and created the first postal system. The Akkadians proved that diverse peoples could live together under just laws, sharing prosperity and protecting each other from external threats. But all empires face challenges. Climate change brought drought to the north. Rebellions erupted in distant provinces. New peoples pressed against the borders, seeking their own piece of the prosperous land. The Akkadian Empire eventually fragmented, but its legacy lived on. The Sumerians and Akkadians had shown the world what was possible when people worked together. They had taken the gift of the rivers and multiplied it 1,000-fold, creating cities, laws, art, and literature that would inspire civilizations for millennia to come. In the quiet of evening, when the day's work was done, people in these ancient cities would gather to hear stories of their ancestors. They spoke of the time before cities, when their forefathers lived simple lives by the riverside. Those days seemed impossibly distant now, like memories from a dream. The rivers still flowed, carrying their ancient promises. But now they flowed past walls and towers, through channels carved by human hands, serving cities that had grown far beyond anything the first settlers could have imagined. The seeds planted by flowing water had grown into a forest of human achievement. Hammurabi's golden dawn time flowed like the rivers themselves, carrying new peoples and new dreams into Mesopotamia. The Akkadian Empire had crumbled, and for generations the land knew conflict. City fought city, kingdom rose and fell, and the people longed for peace. Then, in the city of Babylon, a young prince named Hammurabi ascended to the throne. Babylon was not yet the wonder of the world it would become. When Hammurabi inherited the crown around 1792 BCE, his kingdom was small, surrounded by more powerful neighbors. Other rulers dismissed him as just another minor king in a land full of petty kingdoms. They would learn how wrong they were. Hammurabi possessed something rare among rulers: patience. While other kings rushed into battle, he waited, watched, and planned. He understood that true power came not from the strength of armies alone, but from the loyalty of people who believed their king cared for their welfare. The young king spent his early years strengthening Babylon from within. He rebuilt temples, improved the city's defenses, and most importantly, listened to his people's concerns. Merchants complained about unfair trade practices. Farmers worried about water rights. Families sought justice when they were wronged. Hammurabi heard them all and began to dream of a better way. His opportunity came when the balance of power shifted across Mesopotamia. The kingdom of Larsa controlled the south, while Eshnunna held sway in the north. These two powers were locked in a struggle that exhausted both. Hammurabi watched and waited for the perfect moment to act. When that moment came, Hammurabi struck with surprising speed and skill. His armies were well-trained and disciplined, but more importantly, they fought for a king who had earned their respect. City after city opened its gates to Babylonian forces, not out of fear, but out of hope for the justice Hammurabi promised. The conquest of Larsa in 1763 BCE marked the true beginning of Babylon's golden age. Hammurabi had united most of Mesopotamia under his rule, creating an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean trade routes. But conquest was only the beginning of his vision. What made Hammurabi truly great was not his military success, but what he did with victory. Instead of ruling through fear, he chose to govern through law. He understood that an empire built on justice would last longer than one built on the sword alone. The king established his capital in Babylon, transforming it from a modest city into a magnificent metropolis. New temples rose to honor the gods, their walls gleaming with glazed brick and precious metals. The famous Ishtar Gate, though built by later kings, had its origins in Hammurabi's vision of Babylon as a city worthy of divine favor. Trade flourished under Hammurabi's rule. Merchants from distant lands came to Babylon's markets bringing exotic goods and new ideas. The city became a crossroads of culture, where Sumerian traditions mixed with Akkadian innovations, creating something fresh and vibrant. But Hammurabi's greatest achievement was not built of brick and mortar. It was carved in stone and written in the hearts of his people. The king spent years crafting a comprehensive legal code that would ensure justice for all his subjects, from the highest noble to the humblest servant. The code addressed everything from trade disputes to family matters, from property rights to criminal justice. It established clear punishments for wrongdoing and protections for the innocent. Most remarkably, it recognized that different circumstances required different responses, a revolutionary idea for its time. Hammurabi personally oversaw the creation of his legal masterwork. He consulted with judges, priests, merchants, and farmers, ensuring that his laws reflected the real needs of his people. The code was not imposed from above, but grew from the ground up, rooted in the daily experiences of those who would live under its guidance. When the laws were complete, Hammurabi ordered them carved on massive stone pillars called stelae. These monuments were placed in temples and public squares throughout the empire, ensuring that everyone could know their rights and responsibilities. The law would no longer be a mystery known only to the powerful. The king's own words, preserved in the prologue to his code, reveal his vision. When the lofty Anu, king of the Anunnaki, and Enlil, lord of heaven and earth, who determines the destinies of the land, determined for Marduk, the firstborn of Ea, the Enlil functions over all mankind, made him great among the Ijigi, called Babylon by its exalted name, made it supreme in the world, established for him in its midst an enduring kingship, whose foundations are as firm as heaven and earth. At that time, Anu and Enlil named me Hammurabi, the exalted prince, the reverent one, to cause justice to prevail in the land. The people of Babylon responded to their king's wisdom with unprecedented loyalty and prosperity. Crime decreased as potential wrongdoers knew they would face swift and certain justice. Trade increased as merchants could rely on consistent laws across the empire. Families felt secure knowing their rights were protected by written law. Hammurabi ruled for 43 years, and his reign became the standard by which later kings would be measured. He had taken a small kingdom and transformed it into the greatest power in the known world. More importantly, he had shown that true greatness came not from conquest alone, but from the wisdom to govern well. As the king aged, he could look out from his palace windows at the city he had built and the empire he had created. The rivers still flowed past Babylon's walls, carrying trade goods and diplomatic messages to distant lands. The god Marduk's temple rose majestically above the city, its golden peak catching the first rays of dawn. In the quiet moments before sleep, Hammurabi might have reflected on the journey that had brought him from a minor prince to the ruler of an empire. He had succeeded not through cruelty or luck, but through patient wisdom and genuine care for his people's welfare. His laws would outlive him, his city would grow even greater, and his name would be remembered as long as humans valued justice. The golden dawn of Babylon had begun, and its light would shine across the ancient world for generations to come. The code in the courtyard. In the heart of Babylon, where merchants haggled and children played, stood a massive pillar of black stone. Taller than 3 men, covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks, it drew curious crowds every day. This was no ordinary monument. It was Hammurabi's Code, the world's first comprehensive written law, displayed for all to see and understand. The pillar itself was a work of art. At its top, carved in relief, the god Shamash sat on his throne, flames dancing from his shoulders as he handed the symbols of justice to King Hammurabi. Below this divine scene, 282 laws were etched in cuneiform script, each one carefully crafted to address the real problems people faced in their daily lives. The laws covered everything imaginable. A farmer whose crops were damaged by a neighbor's wandering ox could find remedy here. A merchant cheated in a business deal could seek justice. A woman wronged by her husband could discover her rights. The code spoke to rich and poor alike, though it acknowledged the social realities of ancient times. One of the most famous principles carved in stone was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This phrase, which would echo through history, represented something revolutionary for its time, the idea that punishment should fit the crime. Before Hammurabi, justice often meant revenge, with penalties far exceeding the original wrong. The code brought proportion and reason to the dispensing of justice, but the laws were more nuanced than this simple phrase suggests. The code recognized different classes of people and tailored punishments accordingly. A blow struck against a nobleman carried a heavier penalty than the same act against a commoner. While this seems unfair by modern standards, it represented a major advance in legal thinking, the idea that circumstances matter in determining justice. The economic laws reveal a sophisticated understanding of commerce. The code regulated interest rates, preventing moneylenders from charging excessive fees that would trap borrowers in debt. It established standard weights and measures, ensuring fair trade across the empire. It protected widows and orphans from exploitation, recognizing that society's most vulnerable members needed special safeguards. Family law occupied a large portion of the code, reflecting the central importance of household relationships in Babylonian society. Marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption were all carefully regulated. The laws protected women's property rights in ways that were progressive for the ancient world, while also maintaining traditional family structures. Perhaps most remarkably, the code included laws protecting slaves from excessive cruelty. While it accepted slavery as a fact of life, it established limits on how slaves could be treated and provided paths for them to regain their freedom. This recognition of basic human dignity, even for the lowest members of society, set Babylon apart from many of its neighbors. The process of creating these laws was as important as their content. Hammurabi didn't simply dictate them from his throne. Instead, he consulted with judges, priests, and community leaders throughout his empire. He studied the legal traditions of the peoples he had conquered, incorporating the best elements of each into his comprehensive code. Local courts throughout the empire used the code as their guide. Judges were required to know the laws and apply them consistently, regardless of their personal opinions or local customs. This standardization of justice was revolutionary. For the first time in history, a person could know what to expect from the legal system, no matter where they lived within the empire. The physical placement of the code's stone copies was carefully planned. They stood in temple courtyards where people gathered for festivals, in market squares where merchants conducted business, and near city gates where travelers could learn the laws of the land they were entering. The law was made truly public, accessible to anyone who could read or who could find someone to read it for them. Scribes created clay tablet copies of the most important laws, making them even more widely available. These tablets were kept in schools, government offices, and private homes. Legal education became part of general education, with young people learning not just how to read and write, but what their rights and responsibilities were as citizens. The code also served a religious purpose. Ancient peoples believed that good laws came from the gods, and Hammurabi presented his code as divinely inspired. The image of Shamash handing the symbols of justice to the king reinforced this idea. Following the law was not just a civil duty, it was a religious obligation. The practical effects of the code were immediate and profound. Crime rates dropped as potential wrongdoers realized they would face certain punishment. Trade flourished as merchants could rely on consistent legal protections. Families felt more secure knowing their rights were clearly defined and protected. The code's influence extended far beyond Hammurabi's lifetime and empire. Future rulers would model their own legal systems on his pioneering work. The Hebrew Bible's legal codes show clear influence from Hammurabi's principles. Roman law, which would later govern much of the world, built upon foundations first laid in ancient Babylon. Visitors to Babylon marveled at the sight of laws carved in stone for all to see. In their own lands, law was often the whim of local rulers or the memory of tribal elders. Here, in this great city between the rivers, justice had been given permanent form, elevated from human caprice to divine command. As evening fell over the city, the stone pillars cast long shadows across the courtyards where they stood. In those shadows, the ordinary people of Babylon went about their lives with a security unknown to previous generations. They lived under the protection of written law, in a society where justice was not just an ideal, but a daily reality. The code represented more than legal innovation. It was a promise that the strong would not prey upon the weak, that agreements would be honored, that wrongs would be made right. In a world often governed by might alone, Hammurabi had created something precious, a kingdom where right made might, where the law was king. Temples and ziggurats, Above the bustling streets of ancient Babylon, massive structures reached toward the heavens like stone prayers. These were the ziggurats, stepped pyramids that served as bridges between earth and sky, between human worshippers and their gods. Each brick was placed with reverence, each level built with the hope of divine blessing. The most magnificent of these sacred towers was the Itemenanki, dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's patron god. Its name meant house of the foundation of heaven and earth, and it rose in 7 terraces to a height that amazed all who saw it. Later peoples would remember it as the Tower of Babel, though by then its glory had faded to legend. Building a ziggurat was a community effort that could span generations. Thousands of workers labored to create the millions of bricks needed for construction. Each brick was made from the same river mud that had nourished the first settlements, mixed with straw and baked in the sun. The builders saw their work as holy, transforming the basic elements of their land into something sacred. The foundation was laid with special care, often including small tablets inscribed with prayers and offerings. These foundation deposits were meant to ensure the god's favor and the building's stability. Workers would chant as they laid each course of bricks, their voices rising with the walls they built. The ziggurat's step design served both practical and spiritual purposes. Each level was smaller than the one below, creating a stable structure that could support enormous weight. The terraces also represented the layers of heaven, with each level bringing worshippers closer to the realm of the gods. Access to the upper levels was carefully controlled. External staircases built into the structure's sides led from terrace to terrace. Only priests and other religious officials could climb these sacred steps, carrying offerings and prayers to the temple at the summit. The common people could only gaze upward and imagine the divine presence dwelling above. The temple at the ziggurat's peak was the most sacred space in the city. Here, the god was believed to dwell in physical form, represented by a golden statue that was tended like a living being. Priests would wake the god each morning with hymns, offer meals throughout the day, and provide evening entertainment. The god was not just worshipped, but hosted, treated as an honored guest in their earthly home. These temples were centers of learning as well as worship. Attached to each major temple was a school where young scribes learned to read and write. The curriculum included not just religious texts, but also mathematics, astronomy, and literature. The priests were the keepers of knowledge, preserving the wisdom of ages in their libraries of clay tablets. The temple complex included more than just the ziggurat itself. Surrounding the great tower were smaller buildings that housed the priests, workshops for crafting religious objects, and storerooms for the offerings brought by worshippers. These complexes were like small cities within the larger city, with their own economies and social structures. The economic power of the temples was enormous. They owned vast estates worked by tenant farmers, received regular offerings from devoted worshippers, and engaged in trade and money lending. This wealth was used not just to maintain the temples, but to support the poor, fund public works, and sponsor festivals that brought joy to the entire community. The most important of these festivals was the New Year celebration, which lasted for 11 days and culminated in a grand procession to the temple of Marduk. The king himself participated in this ritual, symbolically receiving his authority from the god for another year. The entire city would be decorated with flowers and banners, while priests chanted the creation epic that told how Marduk had brought order to the world. Different gods had different temples throughout the city, each designed to reflect the deity's particular nature and powers. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, had a temple decorated with images of lions and flowers. Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom, was honored in a temple lined with inscribed tablets. The diversity of these sacred spaces reflected the rich spiritual life of the Babylonian people. The construction techniques used in these temples were marvels of ancient engineering. The builders had learned to create strong mortar from bitumen, a natural tar that seeped from the ground in some areas. This waterproof binding helped the structures survive the seasonal floods and the test of time. Decorative elements transformed these functional buildings into works of art. Glazed bricks in brilliant blues and greens covered the walls, creating patterns that caught and reflected light. Golden fixtures gleamed in the torch-lit interiors. Carved reliefs told stories of gods and heroes, turning the temple walls into illustrated books of mythology. The ziggurats also served as administrative centers for the communities they served. Records were kept here of births, deaths, marriages, and land transactions. Legal disputes were often resolved in temple courts, with priests serving as judges. The temple was truly the heart of the community, pumping life-giving services throughout the social body. At night, when the city grew quiet, the ziggurats remained active. Priests would climb to the highest terraces to observe the stars, carefully recording the movements of planets and constellations. This astronomical knowledge was used to create calendars, predict eclipses, and provide guidance for agricultural and religious activities. The sight of these massive structures dominated the landscape for miles around. Travelers approaching Babylon would see the ziggurats long before they reached the city walls, their peaks catching the first rays of dawn and the last light of sunset. These towers announced to the world that here was a city blessed by the gods, a place where heaven touched earth. The builders of these sacred structures believed they were creating more than buildings. They were constructing pathways to the divine. Each brick laid was an act of devotion. Each room completed was a gift to the gods. The ziggurats stood as proof of human aspiration, monuments to the desire to reach beyond the mundane world and touch something eternal. In the shadow of these great towers, the people of Babylon lived their daily lives with the constant reminder that they were part of something larger than themselves. The ziggurats connected them to their gods, to their history, and to their hopes for the future. These sacred mountains of brick and bitumen were the physical embodiment of faith itself. Gods of the Riverlands. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the rivers whispered their ancient songs, the gods of Babylon stirred in their heavenly realm. These divine beings shaped the world with their thoughts, their emotions, and their mighty deeds. To understand Babylon, one must first know the gods who watched over it from their throne rooms in the sky. At the head of this celestial court sat Marduk, the young god who had won supremacy through courage and wisdom. His story was told every new year in the sacred precincts of his great temple, a tale of cosmic battle and triumphant order. But Marduk's rise to power was not inevitable. It was earned through the most dramatic struggle in all mythology. Long before humans walked the earth, the universe was ruled by chaos. The primordial waters, personified as the dragon Tiamat, held dominion over all that existed. These were not peaceful waters like the life-giving rivers, but turbulent seas of confusion and strife. Tiamat and her consort Apsu represented the wild forces that existed before order, before law, before the gentle rhythms that governed civilized life. The younger gods, born from these primordial waters, grew restless under the chaotic rule of their elders. They desired order, structure, and purpose. Their noise and energy disturbed Apsu's sleep, and in his anger, he decided to destroy his own children. But the wise god Ea discovered the plot and killed Apsu first, claiming his power and establishing his own dwelling place in the sweet waters below. Tiamat's rage at her consort's death knew no bounds. She gathered an army of monsters, dragons, serpents, and creatures of nightmare to wage war against the younger gods. At their head, she placed Kingu, her new champion, granting him the tablets of destiny that gave him power over fate itself. The young gods trembled before Tiamat's terrible host. One by one, the greatest among them tried to face the dragon goddess and failed. Even Ea, who had defeated Apsu, could not stand against her fury. It seemed that chaos would triumph and the universe would return to its original state of formless confusion. Then Marduk stepped forward. Young and strong, armed with bow and net, he offered to face Tiamat on one condition. If he won, he would become king of all the gods. The desperate deities agreed, and the cosmic battle began. The fight between Marduk and Tiamat shook the foundations of existence. She opened her jaws to swallow him, but he caught her with his net and drove the winds into her throat. When she gasped for breath, he shot an arrow into her heart, slaying the great dragon of chaos. From her corpse, he created the world. Her body became the earth, her blood the rivers, her bones the mountains. But Marduk's work was not finished. From the blood of Kingu, Tiamat's defeated champion, he created humanity. These new beings would serve the gods, offering worship and sacrifice so that the divine beings could rest from their labors. Humans were thus born with a sacred purpose to maintain the order that Marduk had established through his victory over chaos. This creation story was more than entertainment for the Babylonians. It explained their place in the universe and their relationship with the divine. Every spring flood reminded them of the primordial waters. Every harvest showed them the fruits of divine order. Their king ruled by Marduk's authority. Their laws reflected his justice. Their city was his earthly dwelling place. But Marduk was not alone in the Babylonian pantheon. His father Ea remained the god of wisdom and fresh water, dwelling in the Apsu below the earth. From his realm came the life-giving springs and the knowledge that allowed humans to thrive. Craftsmen and scribes especially honored Ea, seeing their skills as gifts from this wise deity. Enlil, the god of air and storms, controlled the winds that brought both blessing and destruction. His breath could fill the sails of merchant ships or unleash hurricanes that leveled cities. Farmers watched the sky carefully, reading the signs of Enlil's mood in the movement of clouds and the direction of breezes. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, embodied the passionate forces that drove human life. As the evening star, she inspired lovers to embrace. As the morning star, she led warriors into battle. Her dual nature reflected the Babylonian understanding that creation and destruction were closely linked, that life required both love and conflict to flourish. The sun god Shamash brought light and justice to the world each day. His daily journey across the sky allowed him to see all human actions, making him the perfect judge of right and wrong. It was Shamash who had given Hammurabi the authority to create his famous code of laws, blessing the king's work with divine approval. Sin, the moon god, marked the passage of time with his changing phases. His silvery light guided travelers through dark nights and helped farmers know when to plant and harvest. The crescent moon became a symbol of divine protection, worn as an amulet by those who sought the god's favor. These major deities were supported by countless minor gods, each with their own sphere of influence. There were gods of individual cities, gods of particular crafts, gods who watched over households and families. The Babylonian world was thoroughly populated with divine beings, each playing their part in the cosmic order established by Marduk's victory. The gods were not distant, abstract forces, but active participants in human affairs. They had emotions, preferences, and personalities. They could be pleased by proper worship or angered by neglect. They formed relationships with humans, sometimes blessing them with prosperity, sometimes testing them with hardship. This intimate relationship between gods and mortals meant that religious life was woven into every aspect of daily existence. Before eating, Babylonians would offer a portion to the gods. Before beginning work, they would seek divine blessing. Before making important decisions, they would consult priests who could interpret the will of the gods through various forms of divination. The gods of Babylon were thus more than objects of worship. They were cosmic forces that explained the workings of the universe and humanity's place within it. They provided meaning, purpose, and order to lives that might otherwise seem random and chaotic. In their stories, the Babylonians found not just entertainment, but truth about the nature of existence itself. As night fell over the great city, the people would look up at the stars and see the gods looking back. The same divine beings who had created the world continued to watch over it, ensuring that the order won by Marduk's triumph would endure. In this knowledge, the people of Babylon found comfort and slept peacefully under the protection of their celestial guardians. Dreams in cuneiform. In the gentle light of dawn, scribes throughout Babylon would take their places at low tables, soft clay tablets waiting before them like blank pages eager for stories. With reed styluses in hand, they would begin their daily work of capturing human thoughts in wedge-shaped marks, transforming spoken words into permanent records that would outlast the speakers themselves. The art of writing had begun centuries earlier with simple pictures. A drawing of a bird meant bird. A sketch of water meant water. But as societies grew more complex, so did their need to record abstract ideas, numbers, and sounds. The Babylonians inherited the cuneiform system from their Sumerian predecessors and refined it into something marvelous, a tool that could capture not just objects, but thoughts, emotions, and dreams. Learning to write was a privilege reserved for the few. Young boys from wealthy families would enter the temple schools at age 7, beginning a decade-long journey into literacy. The schoolmaster, stern but caring, would guide them through the hundreds of signs they needed to master. Each sign could represent a word, a syllable, or even an idea, and many signs had multiple meanings that changed depending on context. The students' days began before sunrise with the preparation of clay. They would knead river mud until it reached the perfect consistency, soft enough to take clear impressions, but firm enough to hold its shape. Too wet, and the marks would blur. Too dry, and the stylus would scratch rather than press. Practice tablets filled with the same exercises generation after generation. Students would copy out lists of words, names of gods, types of birds, parts of the body. They memorized mathematical tables, practiced writing their own names, and copied moral sayings that taught them how to live good lives. A scribe who knows his craft will never lack for food, read one popular exercise, encouraging the young scholars in their difficult studies. The most talented students would eventually specialize. Some became temple scribes, recording religious ceremonies and maintaining the sacred calendar. Others joined the royal administration, drafting letters to foreign kings or keeping track of tax revenues. The most gifted might become literary scribes, creating new works of poetry and preserving the great epics of the past. These literary scribes were the guardians of humanity's first great stories. They copied and recopied the Epic of Gilgamesh, ensuring that the tale of the hero king and his quest for immortality would survive for future generations. They preserved creation myths, love songs, and wisdom literature, creating libraries that were treasuries of human thought and feeling. But cuneiform was not just for grand literature. The majority of tablets found by archaeologists contain the everyday records of ordinary people. Marriage contracts, business agreements, shopping lists, and personal letters reveal the intimate details of ancient life. A merchant writes to his wife, apologizing for his long absence on a trading journey. A mother sends instructions to her son about managing the family property. A student complains to his parents about the poor food at school. The mathematical tablets show the practical genius of Babylonian scholars. They developed a sophisticated number system based on 60, the same system we still use for measuring time and angles. Their astronomical observations were so accurate that they could predict eclipses centuries in advance. They solved complex algebraic problems and understood geometric principles that would not be rediscovered until much later in history. Medical tablets reveal a culture that combined rational observation with spiritual healing. Babylonian doctors recorded symptoms, treatments, and outcomes with scientific precision. They performed surgery, set broken bones, and created medicines from herbs and minerals. Yet they also recognized that illness could have spiritual causes, requiring prayers and rituals alongside physical treatment. Legal tablets preserve thousands of court cases showing how Hammurabi's code was applied in practice. Property disputes, inheritance claims, and criminal trials are all documented in careful detail. These records reveal a sophisticated legal system that protected the rights of all citizens, from wealthy merchants to humble farmers. The process of creating a tablet was itself a form of meditation. The scribe would hold the stylus lightly, pressing it into the clay at various angles to create the wedge shapes that formed each sign. The rhythm of writing, press, lift, created a gentle cadence that helped focus the mind. In this quiet concentration, thoughts became permanent. Fleeting words transformed into lasting records. Personal letters reveal the emotional lives of ancient people. A father writes proudly of his son's achievements in school. A business partner expresses concern about a friend's illness. Lovers separated by distance exchange tender messages. These tablets remind us that despite the vast gulf of time, human feelings remain fundamentally unchanged. The tablets were fired in kilns to make them permanent, or sometimes simply dried in the sun if they were meant for temporary use. The most important documents were stored in jar libraries, carefully organized and cataloged. Some libraries contained thousands of tablets, representing the accumulated knowledge of entire civilizations. Temple scribes maintained detailed records of religious festivals, noting which rituals were performed and which omens were observed. These tablets served as instruction manuals for future ceremonies, ensuring that traditions would be passed down correctly. They also recorded the dreams and visions of priests, believing that the gods communicated through these nighttime messages. Royal scribes faced the challenge of diplomatic correspondence. Letters between kings required careful attention to protocol and etiquette. The wrong phrase could cause offense, the right words could prevent war. These diplomatic tablets show a sophisticated international system where kingdoms from Egypt to Iran maintained regular communication. School tablets often contain practice exercises that seem surprisingly familiar. Students copied out multiplication tables, worked through word problems involving the measurement of fields, and, practiced writing formal letters. Teachers would correct mistakes and add encouraging comments, just as educators do today. The scribes saw themselves as servants of Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom. Before beginning work each day, they would offer a brief prayer for skill and accuracy. They understood that their work was sacred, preserving knowledge for future generations and enabling their civilization to function smoothly. As evening approached and the light grew too dim for detailed work, scribes would carefully store their tablets and clean their tools. The clay that remained unused would be re-wetted and saved for tomorrow's work. In this daily cycle of creation and preservation, the written word became humanity's most powerful tool for conquering time and distance. The legacy of these ancient scribes extends far beyond their own era. The cuneiform tablets they created provide our most detailed window into the daily life of the world's first urban civilization. Through their patient work, we can hear the voices of people who lived thousands of years ago, sharing their hopes, fears, dreams, and discoveries across the vast expanse of time. In the quiet of the tablet house, surrounded by thousands of clay records, the scribes of Babylon formed one of humanity's most important tasks, transforming the spoken word into permanent memory, ensuring that knowledge and wisdom would survive long after their creators had returned to dust. Nebuchadnezzar the Dreamer. Centuries after Hammurabi's golden age, Babylon had known both glory and defeat. Empires had risen and fallen, conquerors had come and gone, but the great city endured. Then, in 605 BCE, a young prince named Nebuchadnezzar ascended to the throne and began the most magnificent chapter in Babylon's long history. From his first days as king, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed on a scale that amazed even his own people. He looked at the city his ancestors had built and envisioned something grander, a capital that would surpass every wonder the world had ever known. His dreams were not idle fantasies, but blueprints for transformation that he pursued with tireless energy. The young king inherited an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, but he wanted more than territory. He sought to create a civilization that would be remembered forever, a culture that would influence the world long after his armies had been forgotten. In pursuing this vision, he would become both builder and destroyer, creator and conqueror. Nebuchadnezzar's first great project was the expansion of Babylon itself. He ordered the construction of new walls that would make the city impregnable. These barriers rose to unprecedented heights, wide enough for four-horse chariots to race along their tops. The walls were not just military fortifications, but statements of power, announcing to all who approached that they were entering the domain of the world's greatest king. The king's building projects employed thousands of workers from across his empire. Skilled craftsmen came from conquered territories, bringing their techniques and traditions to enhance Babylonian architecture. The result was a fusion of styles that created something entirely new, buildings that combined the best elements of many cultures into a unified artistic vision. But Nebuchadnezzar was more than just a builder. He was a conqueror who expanded his empire through a series of brilliant military campaigns. His armies marched into Syria and Palestine, bringing these wealthy regions under Babylonian control. The conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BCE marked the peak of his military success and the beginning of one of history's most significant population movements. The siege of Jerusalem lasted 18 months, a testament to both the city's determination and Nebuchadnezzar's patience. When the walls finally fell, the king made a decision that would echo through history. Rather than simply demanding tribute, he ordered the city's elite to be relocated to Babylon. This policy of deportation was not born of cruelty, but of wisdom. By bringing skilled people to his capital, he enriched his own kingdom while preventing future rebellions. Among those brought to Babylon were priests, scribes, craftsmen, and nobles, the very people who could contribute most to the empire's prosperity. They were not treated as slaves, but as valuable assets, given positions in the government and opportunities to practice their trades. This policy of integration rather than oppression became one of Nebuchadnezzar's greatest innovations. The king himself was fascinated by these foreign cultures and their wisdom. He established schools where Babylonian and foreign scholars could exchange ideas. The royal library grew to contain works in dozens of languages, making Babylon a center of learning that attracted students from across the known world. Nebuchadnezzar's court became legendary for its magnificence. Foreign ambassadors reported in wonder about banquets served on golden dishes, about gardens that seemed to float in the air, about walls decorated with glazed bricks that shone like jewels. The king understood that impressive displays of wealth and power were themselves weapons in the game of international politics. Yet, for all his worldly success, Nebuchadnezzar remained a deeply spiritual man. He devoted enormous resources to religious projects, rebuilding temples and commissioning new statues of the gods. He saw himself as the gods' chosen representative on earth, responsible for maintaining the divine order that kept the world in balance. The king's relationship with the god Marduk was particularly close. He rebuilt Marduk's great temple, the Esagila, making it even more magnificent than before. The annual New Year festival, where the king renewed his authority through religious ritual, became a spectacular celebration that lasted for days and drew pilgrims from throughout the empire. Nebuchadnezzar also had a mystical side that expressed itself through dreams and visions. Ancient texts record several instances where the king experienced prophetic dreams that required interpretation by wise men. These dreams often dealt with the future of his kingdom and the fate of the world, reflecting his deep concern for the legacy he would leave behind. His most famous dreams, recorded in the biblical book of Daniel, show a ruler grappling with questions of power and mortality. The dream of the great statue with feet of clay revealed his awareness that even the mightiest empires eventually crumble. The dream of the great tree that was cut down expressed his fears about the temporary nature of worldly success. These spiritual concerns did not weaken the king's determination to build for eternity. He commissioned works of art and architecture designed to last for thousands of years. The Ishtar Gate, with its magnificent glazed brick reliefs of lions and dragons, was created to inspire awe in visitors for generations to come. Every detail was planned with posterity in mind. The king's engineering projects were equally ambitious. He ordered the construction of an elaborate canal system that brought fresh water to every district of the city. Underground passages connected important buildings, allowing secure movement during times of siege. The infrastructure he created supported a population larger than any city had ever held before. Nebuchadnezzar's influence extended far beyond architecture and engineering. He standardized weights and measures throughout his empire, facilitating trade and commerce. He established a postal system that allowed rapid communication across vast distances. His administrative innovations became models that later empires would copy and adapt. The king ruled for 43 years, longer than most monarchs of his era. During this time, he transformed Babylon from a regional power into the wonder of the ancient world. His city became a symbol of human achievement, a place where the impossible seemed everyday and dreams took physical form. As he aged, Nebuchadnezzar spent more time in contemplation, often walking through the gardens he had created. He would pause beside the artificial streams and waterfalls, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water and perhaps remembering the simple river that had given birth to the first settlements in this blessed land. The king who had dreamed of building eternity succeeded beyond his wildest hopes. His name would be remembered long after his empire fell. His city would inspire legends for millennia, and his vision of Babylon as the center of the world would echo through literature and prophecy until the end of time. Hanging gardens at twilight. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across Babylon's magnificent streets, the most mysterious of all the city's wonders came alive. The hanging gardens, if they truly existed, would have transformed into a paradise of color and fragrance in the gentle evening light. Here, according to legend, Queen Amytis found solace for her homesickness, surrounded by the green hills and flowing waters of her distant homeland. The story begins with love and longing. Nebuchadnezzar had married Amytis, a princess from the mountainous kingdom of Media, to seal a political alliance between their two nations. She came to Babylon as a young bride, leaving behind the cool forests and rushing streams of her mountain home for the flat, dusty plains of Mesopotamia. At first, the queen marveled at Babylon's wonders. The great walls, the towering ziggurats, and the colorful Ishtar Gate impressed her with their grandeur. But as the novelty wore off and homesickness set in, she began to pine for the landscapes of her youth. The endless flatness of the river valley depressed her spirits, and she grew pale and melancholy. Nebuchadnezzar, devoted to his wife and sensitive to her unhappiness, conceived an ambitious plan. If he could not bring Amytis back to her mountains, he would bring the mountains to her. He would create an artificial landscape that would remind her of home, a green oasis that would rise above the flat rooftops of Babylon like a vision from her dreams. The engineering challenges were immense. To create a multi-level garden in a land with no natural elevation changes required innovative thinking and masterful construction. The king's architects designed a series of terraces supported by massive vaulted chambers, creating an artificial mountain that rose in steps toward the sky. The foundation level required extraordinary strength to support the weight of soil, water, and mature trees several stories above ground. Thick walls of baked brick, sealed with bitumen and lead sheets, formed chambers strong enough to bear tons of earth and stone. These underground rooms also served practical purposes, housing the complex machinery needed to lift water to the upper levels. Creating soil rich enough to support lush vegetation required importing earth from distant regions. Caravans brought fertile loam from the mountains of Media, black soil from river deltas, and carefully composted organic matter from throughout the empire. This precious cargo was layered carefully on each terrace, creating growing medium deep enough for substantial root systems. The water system was perhaps the most ingenious aspect of the entire project. A chain of buckets, operated by teams of workers or possibly by an early form of gear system, lifted water from the Euphrates River to the highest terrace. From there, it flowed down through channels carved into each level, creating streams and waterfalls that nourished the plants and provided the sound of running water that Amytis missed from her homeland. Plants came from across the known world to fill these terraces. Cedar trees from Lebanon, fruit trees from Persia, flowering vines from distant islands, each species chosen for its beauty, fragrance, or symbolic meaning. The gardeners who tended these exotic plants were specialists brought from many lands, each expert in the care of particular species. The lowest terrace might have featured date palms and pomegranate trees, creating a canopy of shade for the levels above. The middle terraces could have held flower gardens arranged in intricate patterns, with roses, jasmine, and other fragrant blooms filling the air with perfume. The highest level might have been reserved for the most delicate plants and the queen's private retreat. Walkways wound through the gardens, allowing visitors to climb from level to level while experiencing different environments and views. Some paths were shaded by overhanging trees, others opened onto sunny clearings where exotic flowers bloomed in carefully arranged beds. Stone benches provided places to rest and contemplate the beauty surrounding them. The gardens would have been most beautiful in the evening when the harsh desert sun softened into golden light. The air would cool and fill with the evening songs of birds that made their homes in this artificial paradise. Peacocks might have wandered the paths, their brilliant plumage adding splashes of blue and green to the verdant landscape. Water played a central role in the garden's appeal. Besides the practical necessity of irrigation, the sound and sight of flowing water created a sensory experience that transported visitors from the dusty city to an idealized natural world. Fountains bubbled in hidden groves, streams gurgled over decorative stones, and small pools reflected the sky and surrounding plants. The Queen's Pavilion, if it existed, would have been placed at the garden's heart, surrounded by the most beautiful and fragrant plants. Here, Amytas could sit in the shade of imported trees, listening to artificial streams while gazing out over a landscape that reminded her of her mountain home. The pavilion might have been built in the Persian style, with carpets and cushions that further enhanced the illusion of being in a different land. Maintaining such an elaborate garden required constant attention. Teams of gardeners worked from dawn to dusk, watering plants, pruning growth, replacing dead specimens, and adjusting the water flow to meet each plant's needs. The cost of this maintenance was enormous, but Nebuchadnezzar considered it a small price for his wife's happiness. The gardens became famous throughout the ancient world, attracting visitors from distant lands who came to see this artificial wonder. Greek historians wrote about them centuries later, including them among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. These accounts, filtered through time and translation, are the only evidence we have that the gardens ever existed. Modern archaeologists have searched for traces of these legendary gardens, but have found no conclusive evidence. Some suggest they may have been located outside Babylon proper, or that they might not have existed at all. Perhaps they were a product of poetic imagination, a symbol of Babylon's wealth and power rather than an actual place. But whether real or legendary, the Hanging Gardens capture something important about Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, a kingdom where love inspired grand gestures, where engineering served beauty, and where the impossible seemed achievable. In a land that had learned to make the desert bloom through irrigation and agriculture, the idea of hanging gardens did not seem fantastical, but merely ambitious. As twilight deepened into night, the gardens would have taken on an almost magical quality. Oil lamps would illuminate the pathways, their flickering light creating dancing shadows among the leaves. The air would be thick with the perfume of night-blooming flowers, and the sound of water would provide a gentle lullaby for the queen's sleep. In her dreams, perhaps Amytas wandered not through artificial terraces, but through the real mountains of her youth. And perhaps Nebuchadnezzar, checking on his beloved gardens before retiring, found satisfaction in knowing that his love had created something beautiful enough to inspire wonder for thousands of years to come. Ishtar's Gate, Babylon's heart. Through the dusty streets of ancient Babylon, all roads led to the same magnificent destination. Rising before visitors like a vision from the realm of the gods themselves stood the Ishtar Gate, a masterpiece of glazed brick and golden beauty that served as the ceremonial entrance to the world's most powerful city. This was where earth met heaven, where mortal grandeur touched divine splendor. The gate took its name from Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, whose complex nature embodied the dual aspects of Babylon itself. Like the goddess, the city could be both nurturing and fierce, both welcoming to friends and terrible to enemies. The gate that bore her name reflected this duality in every carefully crafted detail. From a distance, the gate appeared as a wall of brilliant blue, a color so vivid it seemed to glow with inner light. As travelers drew closer, the true artistry became apparent. The blue background was not plain, but decorated with raised reliefs of magnificent beasts, lions sacred to Ishtar, bulls representing the weather god Adad, and dragons symbolizing Marduk, patron deity of Babylon. The creation of this wonder required skills that pushed ancient craftsmanship to its limits. Master potters shaped each brick by hand, ensuring perfect fit and proper proportion. The glazing process demanded precise control of kiln temperatures and chemical formulations. The rich blue color came from powdered cobalt, a rare and expensive mineral that had to be imported from distant mines. Yellow and white glazes created the stunning animal reliefs that seemed to stride across the gate's surface. Lions prowled in golden majesty, their manes flowing and muscles tensed as if ready to spring to life. Bulls stood with heads raised proudly, their horns catching and reflecting light. Dragons, fantastic creatures that existed only in myth, combined features of serpent, eagle, and lion into beings of supernatural power. The gate's construction began during Nebuchadnezzar's reign as part of his grand vision for the city. Teams of skilled artisans worked for years to complete the project, each craftsman taking pride in contributing to something that would outlast their own brief lives. The work was both devotional and practical, creating a structure that served the gods while protecting the city. The gate itself was actually double, an outer and inner portal separated by a processional way that allowed for elaborate ceremonies. This sacred road, paved with red and yellow bricks arranged in geometric patterns, was wide enough for grand processions involving hundreds of participants. During religious festivals, the entire route would be decorated with banners and flowers. Standing beneath the gate's towering arches, visitors would feel dwarfed by its scale and awed by its beauty. The structure rose several stories high, its walls thick enough to house guard rooms and storage chambers. Arrow slits and defensive positions were cleverly integrated into the decorative scheme, making the gate both beautiful and militarily functional. The inner surfaces of the gate were as carefully decorated as the outer walls. Polished stone lined the passageways, carved with cuneiform inscriptions praising the gods and glorifying Nebuchadnezzar's achievements. The king wanted everyone who passed through his gate to understand the power and piety of Babylon's ruler. During the New Year festival, the gate became the focal point of Babylon's most important religious celebration. The procession route that led through the gate would fill with priests, nobles, and common people, all participating in the renewal ceremony that confirmed Marduk's supremacy and the king's divine authority. The brilliantly colored walls provided a stunning backdrop for these sacred rituals. The acoustic properties of the gate were as carefully planned as its visual impact. The arched passages amplified sounds so that hymns sung within would resonate with haunting beauty. The clip-clop of horses' hooves, the rumble of ceremonial chariots, and the chants of priests would echo impressively, adding an auditory dimension to the gate's majesty. Foreign ambassadors approaching Babylon would see the gate from miles away, its blue walls standing out against the brown landscape like a jewel set in earthen gold. This was intentional. Nebuchadnezzar wanted visitors to understand Babylon's power long before they reached the city proper. The gate was a statement in glazed brick, announcing that they were entering a realm unlike any other. The symbolic program of the gate's decoration conveyed important religious and political messages. The lions of Ishtar reminded viewers of the goddess's protective power over the city. The bulls of Adad invoked the storm god's strength in battle. The dragons of Marduk proclaimed the supreme deity's rule over both divine and earthly realms. Together, these symbols created a comprehensive statement of Babylon's divine protection. Merchants and traders who formed the lifeblood of Babylon's economy would pass through the gate daily with their caravans of goods. The site never lost its power to inspire. These practical men, focused on profits and trade routes, would pause in their conversations to marvel at the craftsmanship surrounding them. The gate reminded everyone that Babylon was more than just a commercial center. It was a holy city blessed by the gods. The maintenance of the gate required constant attention. Teams of craftsmen were permanently employed to repair damaged glazing, clean the surfaces, and touch up decorative elements worn by weather and time. This ongoing care was considered a religious duty as well as a practical necessity. Keeping the gate beautiful was a form of worship. During siege warfare, the gate served as more than just a decorative entrance. Its massive walls and defensive positions made it a formidable obstacle for any army attempting to take the city. Archers could rain arrows down on attackers from concealed positions, while the narrow passages limited the number of enemies who could assault the defenses simultaneously. The gate's influence extended far beyond its military and religious functions. It became a symbol of Babylon itself, reproduced in art and literature throughout the ancient world. Foreign artists attempted to capture its beauty in their own works, though none could truly convey the overwhelming impact of seeing the original structure in person. At different times of day, the gate displayed different moods. Dawn light would set the blue glazing ablaze with reflected fire. Midday sun would make the colors seem to vibrate with intensity. Evening would soften the hues into gentle pastels, while night would transform the gate into a mysterious presence illuminated by torches and oil lamps. The gate also served practical administrative functions. Tax collectors maintained offices within its chambers, customs officials inspected goods passing through, and guards checked the credentials of visitors seeking entry to the city. The gate was thus a working part of Babylon's bureaucratic apparatus as well as an artistic masterpiece. Children growing up in Babylon would play in the gate's shadow, taking its magnificence for granted in the way children do. Only when they traveled to other cities did they realize how extraordinary their hometown truly was. The gate had become so much a part of their world that they couldn't imagine a city entrance without glazed brick animals and towering blue walls. As centuries passed and Babylon's power waned, the gate remained as testament to the city's former glory. Even when political control shifted to other powers, visitors continued to marvel at this surviving wonder of ancient architecture. The gate had transcended its original purpose to become something eternal, a work of art that spoke across cultures and generations about human aspiration and divine inspiration. In the quiet moments between the bustle of daily traffic, when the great plaza before the gate stood empty except for the play of light and shadow on blue brick, the structure seemed to breathe with the accumulated prayers and dreams of all who had passed beneath its arches. Here, at Babylon's heart, the gate stood as guardian and symbol, protecting not just a city, but the very idea of civilization itself. The exile of the chosen. The year was 597 BCE. Jerusalem's walls gleamed golden in the morning sun, but shadows gathered on the horizon. King Nebuchadnezzar's armies moved like a slow tide across the desert, their bronze spears catching light, their footsteps raising dust that settled on olive groves and wheat fields. In the palace of Judah, King Jehoiakim sat upon his throne, barely 18 years old. His advisors whispered urgent words about tribute and surrender. The young king's hands trembled as he held the royal seal. Outside, children played in the courtyards, unaware that their world was about to change forever. The siege came gently at first. Babylonian soldiers surrounded the city like a patient embrace. They did not storm the gates or light fires. They simply waited. Days turned to weeks. Food grew scarce. Water became precious. The people of Jerusalem began to understand that their time had come. When the gates finally opened, it was not with violence, but with resignation. King Jehoiakim walked out to meet his fate, his purple robes trailing in the dust. Nebuchadnezzar received him with the courtesy due to a fallen monarch. No chains were placed upon the young king's wrists. No harsh words were spoken. The conquest of Jerusalem was conducted like a formal dance, each step measured and precise. The selection began slowly. Babylonian scribes moved through the city with clay tablets recording names. They sought the skilled ones first. Craftsmen who could work gold and silver, scribes who could read and write, musicians who could play the lyre and harp. These were the treasures Babylon desired most. Families gathered in the temple courtyard, holding each other close. Mothers sang lullabies to calm their children. Fathers spoke quietly of the journey ahead. The elderly offered blessings and prayers. There was weeping, but it was soft weeping, like rain falling on leaves. 10,000 souls were chosen for the march. They packed what they could carry: scrolls of scripture wrapped in linen, family heirlooms tucked into satchels. Children clutched wooden toys and clay dolls. The procession formed like a river, flowing slowly through Jerusalem's streets one final time. The journey to Babylon stretched across 900 miles of desert and plain. Dust clouds marked their passage. At night, campfires dotted the landscape like fallen stars. Guards walked among the exiles, but they were not cruel. Water was shared. Food was distributed. The sick were carried on carts. Ezekiel the prophet walked among his people, speaking words of comfort. His voice carried across the camp each evening, telling stories of God's faithfulness. Children gathered around him, their eyes wide with wonder. Adults found solace in his gentle words. The march became a pilgrimage, each step a prayer for the future. Rivers marked their progress. The Jordan was left behind. The Euphrates welcomed them into Mesopotamia. As they crossed that ancient waterway, many wept. They were leaving the land of their fathers, entering a realm of strange gods and foreign tongues. Babylon's walls appeared on the horizon like a golden mirage. Towers reached toward heaven. Gates gleamed with blue glazed brick. Gardens spilled over terraces in cascades of green. The exiles had never seen such splendor. Their own Jerusalem, beautiful as it was, seemed small and humble by comparison. The city gates opened to receive them. Babylonian citizens lined the streets, curious but not hostile. Children pointed at the foreign dress. Merchants eyed the newcomers with interest. Officials guided the procession toward the quarters prepared for them. Settlements were established along the canals. Houses were built with brick and timber. Gardens were planted with familiar herbs and vegetables. The exiles were not imprisoned but settled. They could marry, raise families, and pursue their trades. Babylon offered them a new home, not a prison. By the waters of Babylon. The canals of Babylon flowed like liquid silver through the city. Willow trees drooped their branches into the water, creating shaded alcoves where the exiled could sit and remember. It was beneath these trees that the most beautiful sorrow in all of Scripture was born. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. The words came from deep in the heart, from a place where homesickness lived like a constant ache. The psalmist who wrote these words knew the particular grief of distance, the way memory could make the heart both full and empty at once. Harps hung silent on the willow branches. These instruments, once used to praise God in Jerusalem's temple, now served as symbols of silence. The exiles had been asked to sing the songs of Zion for their captors' entertainment. But how could they sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Their music was prayer, not performance. The request had come from Babylonian nobles who had heard of Hebrew poetry. They wanted to hear the songs that had echoed through Jerusalem's courts. Perhaps they meant no harm. Perhaps they were simply curious about the culture of their new residents. But to the exiles, the request felt like mockery. Children born in Babylon would grow up hearing these stories. They would learn of Jerusalem from their parents' memories, passed down like precious heirlooms. The city would become mythical to them, a golden vision of home they had never seen. Yet in their hearts, it would remain the most real place on earth. The canals carried more than water. They carried whispered prayers and midnight tears. They carried the dreams of old men who spoke of Mount Zion in their sleep. They carried the hopes of young mothers who taught their babies Hebrew words, afraid the language might be forgotten. Markets buzzed with activity, but the exiles moved through them like ghosts. They bought and sold, worked and earned, but their thoughts remained elsewhere. Babylon's splendor surrounded them, yet they dwelt in a Jerusalem of the mind, walking its familiar streets in memory. Evening brought the hardest hours. When work was done and families gathered, the silence grew thick. Conversations turned to home. Someone would mention the temple courts, the morning sacrifice, the festivals they had celebrated. Tears would flow like the canal water, steady and endless. Women drew water from the river, their clay jars reflecting the sky. As they worked, they sang quietly to themselves. Not the songs of Zion, which were too sacred for common use, but simple melodies that reminded them of home, lullabies their mothers had sung, working songs from harvest time, fragments of beauty preserved in memory. The children adapted first, as children do. They learned Babylonian customs and Aramaic words. They played with local children and discovered new games. But their parents watched with mixed feelings. Each sign of adaptation was both blessing and loss. Their children were surviving, but they were also changing. Scribes worked carefully to preserve their heritage. They copied the ancient texts word by word, letter by letter. The law of Moses was transcribed onto fresh tablets. The Psalms were written in careful script. The prophecies were preserved like seeds, waiting for the right season to bloom. Night brought strange sounds. Babylonian priests chanted in the distance. Temple bells rang at unfamiliar hours. The calls of foreign birds echoed through the darkness. The exiles lay on their beds, listening to a world that was not their own, dreaming of sounds they might never hear again. Some found comfort in small rituals. They faced west when they prayed toward the direction of home. They kept the Sabbath quietly, marking time as their ancestors had. They told stories of Abraham and Moses, David and Solomon. These practices became anchors in the shifting tide of exile. The psalmist's words captured it all. The sitting by the waters, the weeping at the memory of Zion, the harps hung up in silence, the impossible request to sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. The oath never to forget Jerusalem, even if it meant their right hand would lose its skill and their tongue would stick to the roof of their mouth. In these verses, the whole experience of exile found its voice. The pain of separation, the refusal to cheapen what was sacred, the fierce loyalty to a distant home, the determination to remember no matter how much time passed or how far they traveled. Daniel's first night. The palace of Nebuchadnezzar gleamed like a jewel in the fading light. Young Daniel stood in the courtyard, his travel-stained robes a stark contrast to the polished marble beneath his feet. Fountains whispered their eternal songs. Peacocks wandered through gardens where flowers bloomed in impossible colors. He was perhaps 14 years old, chosen from among the exiled nobles for his quick mind and unblemished character. The Babylonian officials had searched through the Hebrew captives, seeking young men who could be trained in the king's service. Daniel's wisdom had marked him from the beginning. The other Hebrew youths gathered around him. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah shared his wonder at the palace's magnificence. They had grown up in Jerusalem's courts, but nothing had prepared them for Babylon's splendor. Gold leaf covered every surface. Precious stones were set into the walls like stars. Chief eunuch Ashpenaz welcomed them with unexpected kindness. His voice was soft, his manner gentle. He explained their new lives would be comfortable. They would eat from the king's table, drink the king's wine, and learn the wisdom of the Chaldeans. In 3 years, they would stand before Nebuchadnezzar himself. New names were given to replace the old ones. Daniel became Belteshazzar, a name that honored Babylon's god Bel. His friends received similar honors. The Babylonians understood that changing names could change loyalties. They sought to remake these Hebrew boys into Babylonian men. The first test came at dinner. Servants brought golden dishes filled with rich foods, meat that had been offered to idols, wine that had been blessed by foreign priests. The feast was magnificent, but Daniel's heart grew troubled. To eat would be to compromise. To refuse might mean death. He approached Ashpenaz with careful words. Could they perhaps eat vegetables instead? Drink water rather than wine? The request was made with such courtesy that the chief eunuch found himself considering it. Daniel's wisdom lay not in confrontation, but in finding gentle paths through difficult terrain. The test was agreed upon. For 10 days, Daniel and his friends would eat only vegetables and drink only water. The other students would feast on the king's delicacies. At the end, their health would be compared. It was a dangerous gamble, but Daniel trusted in something greater than palace food. Their quarters were luxurious beyond imagining. Silk curtains hung from cedar beams. Carpets from distant lands covered the floors. Each young man had servants to attend his needs. Yet Daniel found peace not in these comforts, but in the quiet moments when he could pray to the God of his fathers. The library amazed him most. Scrolls covered every wall containing the wisdom of ages, mathematics and astronomy, medicine and law, the accumulated knowledge of the greatest empire on earth. Daniel approached these texts with the hunger of a scholar, drinking and learning like a man dying of thirst. His teachers were the wisest men in Babylon. They spoke of star charts and dream interpretation. They taught the mysteries of divination and the secrets of the Magi. Daniel learned it all, but he never forgot the source of true wisdom. His God was greater than all the learning of men. The 10 days passed quickly. When the test ended, Daniel and his friends stood before their examiner. Their skin glowed with health. Their eyes were bright and clear. They had grown stronger on vegetables and water than their companions had on royal delicacies. The chief eunuch marveled at what he saw. Word of the Hebrew youths spread through the palace. They were not only healthy, but remarkably intelligent. In every subject they studied, they excelled beyond their peers. Their teachers whispered that they seemed to have divine help. Knowledge came to them as easily as breathing. Daniel discovered he had a special gift. Dreams that puzzled the wise men made perfect sense to him. Visions that seemed like riddles revealed their secrets at his touch. God had given him the key to mysteries that had baffled scholars for generations. The other students watched him with mixed emotions. Some were jealous of his abilities. Others were drawn to his gentle wisdom. Daniel never boasted of his gifts or claimed credit for his success. He spoke always of the God who had blessed him, the same God who had watched over his people in exile. At night, when the palace grew quiet, Daniel would stand at his window and look toward the west. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay Jerusalem, the city of his birth. His body dwelt in Babylon, but his heart remained with his people. He prayed for them each evening, asking God to remember his covenant and bring them home. The 3 years of training stretched ahead like a long journey. Daniel knew he was being prepared for something greater than he could imagine. The God who had delivered him from compromise in small things would use him for larger purposes. He was content to wait, to learn, and to serve faithfully in whatever role he was given. The king's forgotten dream sleep eluded King Nebuchadnezzar like a shy bird that would not be caught. He tossed upon his golden bed, his mind churning with images he could not quite grasp. In the depths of night, a vision had come to him, vivid and terrible. But when dawn broke over Babylon's towers, the dream had vanished like mist. The king rose with the sun, his heart heavy with unease. Something important had visited him in sleep, something that demanded understanding. He could feel its weight pressing upon his spirit, but its meaning remained hidden. The harder he tried to remember, the more elusive it became. Royal summons went out across the city. Every wise man in Babylon was commanded to appear before the throne. Magicians and astrologers hurried through the streets, their robes billowing behind them. Soothsayers and enchanters gathered in the palace courtyard, whispering among themselves about the king's mysterious request. They assembled in the great hall, an impressive gathering of learned men, beards white with age, eyes bright with accumulated wisdom. These were the scholars who had served the crown for decades, interpreting dreams and reading omens. They had never failed to satisfy a royal request. Nebuchadnezzar entered like a storm cloud, his presence filling the vast chamber. Guards flanked him, their spears gleaming in the morning light. The king's face bore the marks of a sleepless night. His eyes held a desperate intensity that made the wise men shift uncomfortably. "I have dreamed a dream," the king announced, his voice echoing off marble walls, "and my spirit is troubled to know the dream." The assembled scholars nodded knowingly. Dream interpretation was their specialty. They had studied the ancient texts, memorized the traditional meanings. They were ready to serve. But then came the king's shocking demand. "Tell me the dream and its interpretation." The wise men exchanged glances of confusion. Normally, the dreamer would recount his vision and they would explain its meaning. But Nebuchadnezzar was asking them to reveal both the dream and its interpretation. It was impossible. The chief magician stepped forward, his voice carefully respectful. "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." It was a reasonable request, the way these things had always been done. But the king's response struck them like thunder. "The thing is gone from me," Nebuchadnezzar declared. "If you will not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill." The threat hung in the air like incense, heavy and ominous. The king's forgetting had become their death sentence. Terror gripped the assembled scholars. They had built their careers on interpreting dreams, but they had never been asked to read the king's mind. They protested that no king had ever made such a request. They argued that only the gods could reveal such secrets, but Nebuchadnezzar remained unmoved. "I know that you would gain time," the king accused, "because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known to me the dream, there is but one decree for you." His patience was exhausted. If his wise men could not help him, what good were they? The magicians made one final plea. "There is not a man upon the earth who can show the king's matter," they declared. "Therefore, there is no king, lord, or ruler who has asked such things of any magician or astrologer or Chaldean." Their words rang with desperate truth, but truth would not save them. Captain Arioch received the king's command with heavy heart. The decree was clear. All the wise men of Babylon were to be executed. He began gathering soldiers, preparing for the grim task ahead. The greatest minds in the empire would perish because they could not read thoughts. Word of the death sentence spread through the city like wildfire. Families of the condemned gathered in the streets, weeping and pleading. The wise men themselves sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend their fate. They had served faithfully for years, but their knowledge had proven worthless when it mattered most. Among those marked for death was young Daniel. He had completed his training and was now counted among the king's wise men. When Captain Arioch came to arrest him, Daniel received the news with remarkable calm. He asked for time to seek the answer the king demanded. That night, Daniel gathered his 3 friends in urgent prayer. They knelt together in the quiet of their chambers, crying out to the God of heaven for mercy. They asked for revelation, for the secret that would save not only their lives, but the lives of all Babylon's scholars. Their prayers rose like incense in the darkness. As dawn approached, the answer came. In a night vision, God revealed to Daniel both the king's forgotten dream and its meaning. The young Hebrew rose from his knees with joy, his heart filled with gratitude. The God of Israel had once again shown his power in the heart of a pagan empire. The fiery furnace. The golden image stood 90 feet tall on the plain of Dura, its surface gleaming like captured sunlight. King Nebuchadnezzar had commanded its construction after his troubling dream, perhaps hoping to control his own destiny through this magnificent display of power. The statue dominated the landscape, visible from miles away. Musicians gathered at its base, their instruments polished and ready. Harps and lyres caught the morning breeze. Drums waited in patient silence. Flutes and pipes lay carefully arranged on silk cushions. When the signal came, their music would ring across the plain, calling all people to worship. The royal decree had gone out to every corner of the empire. All officials, great and small, were commanded to attend the dedication ceremony. Princes and governors traveled from distant provinces. Captains and judges left their courts. Treasurers and counselors abandoned their duties. Babylon's power was on display. The crowd gathered like a human sea on the plain. Thousands upon thousands of people spread across the flat ground, their colorful robes creating a living tapestry. Children clung to their parents' hands. Elderly officials found shade where they could. The anticipation was thick as honey in the air. Herald voices rang out across the multitude, their words echoing from person to person. To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. The penalty for disobedience was announced with equal clarity. Anyone who refused to bow would be cast immediately into a burning fiery furnace. The threat was not idle. A great furnace had been prepared nearby, its flames already leaping toward the sky. The heat could be felt even at a distance. Among the crowd stood 3 young men whose names had been changed but whose hearts remained unchanged. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had risen high in Babylon's government, but their loyalty to the God of Israel had never wavered. They faced the golden image with calm resolve. The moment of testing arrived with the first note of music. The horn sounded its deep, resonant call. Flutes joined in with their sweet melody. Harps added their silver voices to the song. The symphony swelled across the plain like a tide, beautiful and terrible at once. As one, the vast multitude fell to their knees, faces pressed against the earth, hands stretched toward the golden statue. The plain became a carpet of prostrate bodies, all bowing before Nebuchadnezzar's creation. The king watched from his pavilion, satisfaction warming his heart. But 3 figures remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood straight as cedars while the world around them bowed. Their quiet defiance was visible from the royal platform. Babylonian officials pointed them out to the king, their voices urgent with accusation. "O Nebuchadnezzar, live forever," the accusers declared. "You have made a decree that everyone who hears the music shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace." Their words dripped with righteous indignation. The king's face darkened like a storm cloud. These 3 men had been his trusted servants, promoted to high positions in his government. He had treated them with favor and respect. Now they dared to defy his direct command in front of the entire empire. His rage burned hotter than the prepared furnace. "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up?" The king's voice carried across the plain, making the accusation public. He offered them one final chance to reconsider their choice. The 3 friends stood together, their faces peaceful despite the mortal danger. They had made their decision long ago, in the quiet moments of prayer and study. Their God was greater than any earthly king, more powerful than any threat. They would not bow to an image made by human hands. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter," Shadrach replied, his voice steady and clear. "If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king." Their faith rang out like a bell. "But if not," Meshach continued, "let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up." The words sealed their fate. They would trust their God completely, whether he chose to deliver them or not. Nebuchadnezzar's fury blazed beyond all reason. He commanded the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The flames roared skyward, visible to the entire crowd. The heat became so intense that the guards who bound the 3 men were killed by its force. Yet as the king watched through the furnace door, his anger transformed into wonder. 4 figures walked in the flames, not 3. The 4th looked like a son of the gods, shining with divine light. The fire had no power over them. Not a hair was singed, not a garment damaged. They walked in the flames as if strolling through a garden. The tree that touched the sky, peace had settled over Babylon like a gentle blanket. The empire stretched from the rising sun to the setting sun, its borders secure and its people content. King Nebuchadnezzar walked through his palace gardens, observing the prosperity that surrounded him. His heart swelled with satisfaction at all he had accomplished. The hanging gardens cascaded in terraced beauty, their water flowing in silver streams. Exotic flowers bloomed in impossible colors. Fruit trees bore their burden of sweetness. Birds sang from every branch, their melodies blending into a symphony of contentment. The king paused to breathe in the perfume of jasmine and rose. It was during this season of triumph that sleep brought another vision. Nebuchadnezzar lay upon his bed of gold and ivory, his body at rest, but his mind alert to divine communication. In the realm of dreams, God spoke to kings and paupers alike, using the language of symbol and metaphor. The dream began with a tree, not an ordinary tree, but one that grew with supernatural power. Its trunk thickened with each passing moment. Its branches spread like welcoming arms. Its leaves rustled with life, growing greener and more abundant. The tree climbed toward heaven itself, its crown touching the clouds. From his high place, the king watched the tree's magnificent growth. Its shade covered the earth. Wild beasts found shelter beneath its branches. Birds nested in its boughs. All the world was fed from its fruit. The tree had become the center of creation, sustaining every living thing. Then came a voice from heaven, terrible in its authority. A holy watcher descended from the celestial realm, his presence making the air itself tremble. His words rang out like thunder across the dream landscape. Hew down the tree and cut off its branches, shake off its leaves and scatter its fruit. The divine command continued with relentless precision. Let the beasts get out from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field. And let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. The watcher's voice grew even more solemn. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 seasons pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. Nebuchadnezzar woke with a start, his heart pounding like a drum. The dream clung to his mind with terrifying clarity. Unlike his previous vision, this one remained vivid in every detail. The tree, the watcher, the divine judgment, all of it burned in his memory like brands of fire. Fear crept into the king's heart like a cold wind. He understood enough of divine communication to know that this dream bore a personal message. The tree that touched the sky, the one that sheltered the world, could it represent his own kingdom, his own person? The possibility filled him with dread. Once again, the wise men of Babylon were summoned to the royal presence. They came with eager faces, confident in their abilities. The king's previous dream had been interpreted successfully by the young Hebrew Daniel. Surely this vision would prove equally manageable. But when Nebuchadnezzar recounted his dream, silence fell over the assembly like a shroud. The wise men exchanged worried glances. They understood the symbolism well enough to know that this was no ordinary royal vision. This was a judgment dream, and no one wanted to be the bearer of such news. Daniel arrived at the palace with his usual quiet dignity. The king received him with special honor, remembering the young man's previous service. "Belteshazzar," the king said, using Daniel's Babylonian Name, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no secret troubles you. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. As Daniel listened to the dream's details, his face grew troubled. For a full hour he sat in contemplative silence, his mind wrestling with the vision's meaning. The king watched him with growing anxiety, recognizing the weight of what was being revealed. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice heavy with compassion. My lord, the dream be to them that hate you, and the interpretation thereof to your enemies. He wished the prophecy could fall upon Babylon's foes rather than the king himself. But divine truth could not be altered by human desire. The interpretation unfolded like a scroll of destiny. The great tree was indeed Nebuchadnezzar himself. His kingdom had grown until it touched the heavens. His dominion extended to the ends of the earth. His power sheltered nations and fed peoples. But pride had taken root in his heart, and judgment would follow. The cutting down of the tree meant the king would lose his reason and his throne. He would be driven from human society to dwell with the beasts of the field. His mind would become as an animal's mind. 7 years would pass in this condition until he learned that the Most High God rules over all earthly kingdoms. Yet mercy was woven into the message of judgment. The stump would remain, bound with iron and bronze. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom would be preserved, waiting for his restoration. When he acknowledged God's sovereignty, his sanity and his throne would be returned to him. Daniel's voice carried both sorrow and hope as he concluded his interpretation. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto you, and break off your sins by righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of your tranquility. The madness in the garden. 12 months passed like pages turning in a book. The seasons changed from spring to summer to autumn to winter and back to spring again. King Nebuchadnezzar went about his royal duties, but Daniel's words echoed in the chambers of his memory. The dream of the great tree remained vivid, a constant reminder of divine warning. The king found himself pausing often in his garden walks, studying the trees that grew there. Each one seemed to whisper of the vision: the cedar of Lebanon with its spreading branches, the date palm with its crown of fronds, the fig tree heavy with fruit, all reminded him of the tree in his dream, the one that had been cut down by heaven's command. Yet, as the months passed, the warning seemed to fade. The kingdom prospered under his rule. Tribute flowed in from distant lands. Building projects transformed Babylon into a wonder of the world. The king's pride, which had been shaken by the dream, began to reassert itself like a weed growing in fertile soil. The palace roof garden became his favorite retreat. Here, high above the city, he could survey all that his hands had built. The hanging gardens cascaded below him in terraced beauty. The broad avenues stretched toward the horizon. The temples and towers proclaimed his glory to the world. It was a scene to fill any man's heart with satisfaction. On that fateful day, the sun shone with particular brilliance. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the garden trees. The king stood at the parapet, looking out over his domain with eyes that saw only his own accomplishments. The moment had come when pride would reach its fatal flowering. Is not this great Babylon, he declared to the wind and sky, that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? The words fell from his lips like stones into still water, sending ripples through the spiritual realm. The response was immediate and terrible. While the words were still in his mouth, a voice fell from heaven like thunder. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. The pronouncement echoed across the garden, though only the king could hear it. And they shall drive you from men, the voice continued, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. In that very hour, the judgment fell. The king's rational mind, which had commanded armies and administered justice, began to fragment like a broken mirror. His thoughts scattered like leaves before a storm. The carefully constructed personality of a monarch dissolved into confusion and terror. The transformation was swift and complete. Nebuchadnezzar's courtly manner vanished. His royal bearing crumbled. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, then at the garden around him with eyes that no longer understood civilization. The king of Babylon had become something else entirely. His attendants watched in horror as their master dropped to his hands and knees. He began to tear at the grass with his teeth, eating it like a grazing animal. His royal robes became soiled and torn. His carefully groomed beard grew wild and unkempt. The sight was too terrible for the court to witness. Quietly, efficiently, the palace machinery moved to contain the crisis. The king was led away from public view, his condition hidden from the people. Officials whispered of a temporary illness, a period of rest and recovery. But those who saw him knew that something far more profound had occurred. The gardens became his wilderness. In the vast palace grounds, Nebuchadnezzar wandered like a lost soul. He no longer recognized the servants who had once attended him. He feared the buildings he had commanded to be built. His world had shrunk to the immediate sensations of hunger, thirst, and the texture of grass beneath his hands. His hair grew long and wild like eagle's feathers. His nails became like bird's claws, hardened by his new way of life. The royal flesh grew lean and brown from exposure to sun and rain. He who had once been clothed in purple and fine linen now wore only the elements as his garment. Rain fell upon him without recognition. He learned to seek shelter under the spreading trees, huddling against their trunks like any woodland creature. The dew of morning became his drink. The fruits that fell from the trees became his food. He lived as the beasts of the field lived, governed by instinct rather than reason. The court maintained its functions around his absence. Trusted advisors administered the kingdom, following the laws he had established. The great machine of empire continued to run, but its heart was missing. Officials spoke in hushed tones of the king's condition, praying for his restoration. Seasons turned in their ancient rhythm. Spring brought new grass for him to eat. Summer provided fruits and shade. Autumn scattered seeds and nuts for his sustenance. Winter taught him to seek warmth in sheltered places. 7 times the cycle repeated, marking the passage of his judgment. Through all the wild years, something remained constant. Deep in the king's transformed mind, a small flame of awareness flickered. He could not reason as men reason, but he could feel the presence of something greater than himself. The God who had brought judgment was also the God who preserved life. The garden that had once been his pride became his teacher. The trees that had reminded him of his dream now sheltered him in reality. The grass he had once admired for its beauty now sustained him as food. Creation itself became his cathedral, teaching him lessons that no royal education could provide. In the 7th year, as spring returned to the garden, something stirred in the depths of his consciousness. Like a man waking from a long dream, Nebuchadnezzar began to remember who he had been. The fog of madness lifted slowly, revealing the sky above him and the understanding that had been so long absent: Belshazzar's feast. The night air hung thick with incense and wine as 1,000 nobles gathered in Babylon's grandest hall. King Belshazzar had commanded a feast to end all feasts, a celebration of power that would be remembered for generations. Golden vessels filled every table, their surfaces reflecting the light of countless oil lamps. The sound of laughter and music echoed off marble walls. Belshazzar was not Nebuchadnezzar's son by blood, but he ruled as his heir. Young and proud, he had inherited an empire at its peak. The wealth of nations flowed into Babylon's treasuries. The city's walls had never been breached. The king felt invincible as he raised his goblet to toast another night of revelry. The wine flowed like rivers through the great hall. Servants moved between the tables with amphoras and pitchers, keeping every cup filled. The vintage was the finest in the empire, aged in royal cellars for decades. It loosened tongues and lifted spirits, turning the feast into a carnival of joy. Musicians played from raised platforms, their melodies weaving through the conversations. Harps sang their silver songs. Drums beat rhythms that made the heart dance. Flutes whistled like birds calling from distant gardens. The music was a living thing, binding the celebration together with threads of harmony. Dancers moved between the tables like flowing water. Their silk robes caught the lamplight, creating patterns of color and shadow. Bells on their ankles chimed with each step. Their movements told stories without words, ancient tales of gods and heroes, love and victory. As the evening deepened, Belshazzar's mood grew bolder. The wine had warmed his blood and stirred his pride. He looked around at the splendor surrounding him and felt the intoxication of absolute power. An idea formed in his wine-clouded mind, a gesture that would cap the evening's magnificence. "Bring forth the golden vessels," he commanded, his voice carrying over the din of celebration. "The vessels that my father Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple which was in Jerusalem." A hush fell over the nearest tables as his words spread through the hall. The sacred vessels had been stored in Babylon's treasure house for decades. They were the holy implements of Solomon's temple, crafted for the worship of the Hebrew God. Gold cups and silver bowls, each one consecrated for sacred use. No Babylonian hand had dared to touch them for common purposes. Servants hurried to obey the royal command. They returned carrying the temple treasures, their faces troubled by the task. The vessels gleamed in the lamplight, more beautiful than anything crafted by Babylonian hands. They seemed to carry an aura of holiness that made the air itself feel different. Belshazzar seized the largest golden cup with eager hands. It had once held wine for the temple sacrifices, blessed by Hebrew priests in Jerusalem's courts. Now it would serve a different purpose. The king filled it with Babylon's finest vintage and raised it high above his head. "To the gods of gold and silver," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "To the gods of bronze and iron, of wood and stone." The nobles cheered and raised their own cups, following their king's example. They drank deeply, their laughter ringing off the walls. The sacred vessels passed from hand to hand. Lords and ladies filled them with wine and drank in honor of Babylon's deities. The cups that had once held the blood of sacrificial lambs now held the wine of a pagan feast. The bowls that had caught holy oil now gleamed with ordinary wine. In that moment of supreme sacrilege, something changed in the hall. The air grew thick and heavy, as if a storm were approaching. The laughter seemed forced, the music strained. A chill ran through the room despite the warmth of 1,000 oil lamps. Then it appeared. A hand, severed at the wrist, writing upon the plastered wall. No body was visible, no arm to guide it, just fingers moving with deliberate purpose, tracing letters in a script none could read. The lamplight caught the moving digits, making them seem to glow with inner fire. The hall fell silent as death. Goblets slipped from nerveless fingers. Food turned to ashes in opened mouths. Every eye fixed upon the ghostly hand as it continued its mysterious work. 4 words appeared on the wall, written in characters that seemed to burn themselves into the plaster. King Belshazzar's face drained of color, his knees knocked together beneath the table. His hands shook so violently that wine spilled from his cup like blood from a wound. The courage that wine had given him evaporated like mist before the morning sun. "Bring in the astrologers," he cried, his voice cracking with terror. "Bring the Chaldeans and the soothsayers." The command went out through the palace like wildfire. Every wise man in Babylon was summoned to interpret the writing that had appeared so mysteriously. They came running, their robes billowing behind them. The greatest scholars in the empire gathered before the wall, squinting at the strange script. They whispered among themselves, consulting ancient texts and comparing interpretations. But the writing remained as mysterious as when it first appeared. The letters seemed to shift and dance before their eyes. Some thought they recognized Aramaic characters. Others saw ancient Sumerian script. A few claimed the writing resembled Egyptian hieroglyphs, but none could agree on what the words actually said. Hours passed in fruitless debate. The wise men argued and consulted, but the meaning remained hidden. The king's terror grew with each passing moment. He had offered rich rewards for interpretation: purple robes, golden chains, third place in the kingdom. But no amount of treasure could unlock the mystery. Finally, the queen mother entered the hall. She had not attended the feast, perhaps sensing the danger in such revelry. Her aged eyes took in the scene: the scattered vessels, the terrified king, the mysterious writing on the wall. Her voice cut through the chaos like a sword. "O king, live forever," she said with dignity that commanded attention. "Let not your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him." She spoke of Daniel, the Hebrew who had served Nebuchadnezzar so faithfully. In him was found an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, and the ability to interpret dreams and solve riddles. If anyone could read the writing on the wall, it would be this man who had served the royal house for decades. The summons went out into the night. Daniel, now an old man with silver in his beard, was brought before the terrified king. He entered the hall with quiet dignity, his eyes taking in the scene of debauchery and fear. The sacred vessels caught his attention, and sorrow flickered across his weathered face. Belshazzar's voice trembled as he made his desperate plea. If you can read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about your neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. The offer was generous, but Daniel had served God too long to be swayed by earthly rewards. The lion's den years had passed since the writing appeared on Belshazzar's wall. The Babylonian Empire had fallen to the Persians, just as Daniel had foretold. King Cyrus ruled with wisdom and mercy, but it was his successor Darius who would face the greatest test of his reign. The challenge would come not from foreign armies, but from the faith of one elderly man. Daniel had served faithfully under 3 empires. His hair was now white as winter snow, his face lined with the wisdom of decades. Yet his mind remained sharp as a blade, his spirit unbroken by the passing years. The new Persian administration had recognized his value, promoting him to high office once again. The kingdom was divided into provinces, each governed by a president appointed by the king. Daniel was chief among these leaders, set over all the others because of his excellent spirit. The younger officials watched him with mixed emotions: respect for his abilities, envy for his position, and frustration at his incorruptible character. They searched for flaws in his administration like prospectors hunting for gold. His finances were examined down to the smallest coin. His official decisions were scrutinized for signs of favoritism or corruption. His personal life was investigated for any hint of scandal, but they found nothing. Daniel's integrity was like armor, protecting him from every accusation. The Persian officials gathered in secret councils, their voices low with conspiracy. "We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel," they admitted reluctantly, "except we find it against him concerning the law of his God." His faithfulness to the Hebrew faith was well known throughout the kingdom. A plan formed in their whispered conversations. They would use Daniel's devotion against him, turning his greatest strength into his downfall. The trap they designed was elegant in its simplicity. They would make prayer itself a crime, knowing that Daniel would never abandon his daily communion with God. They approached King Darius with smooth words and false concern. "O king, live forever," they began, their voices heavy with feigned loyalty. "All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree." The proposed law seemed reasonable on its surface. For 30 days, no one in the kingdom should pray to any god or man except King Darius himself. Anyone who violated this decree would be cast into the den of lions. It appeared to be a test of loyalty, a way to unify the diverse kingdom under Persian rule. Darius was flattered by the proposal. The idea that his subjects would pray only to him for a month appealed to his royal pride. He failed to see the trap that had been carefully laid, the net that would soon entangle his most faithful servant. The king signed the decree with his royal seal, making it unalterable according to the law of the Medes and Persians. Daniel learned of the new law within hours of its signing. The news came to him as he sat in his chamber, reviewing the day's administrative duties. His servants whispered the details with worried faces, knowing their master's habits. For decades, he had prayed 3 times daily, facing toward Jerusalem. The law made this practice punishable by death. The old man received the news with perfect calm. He thanked his servants for their warning, then dismissed them gently. Alone in his chamber, he considered his options. He could pray in secret, hiding his devotion from prying eyes. He could suspend his prayers for 30 days, resuming them when the decree expired, or he could continue as he always had, trusting God with the consequences. The choice was never really in doubt. Daniel had served his God faithfully for over 70 years. He had faced the furnace of persecution, the lion's den of exile, the flames of political intrigue. His faith had been tested in fire and found pure. He would not compromise now in the twilight of his life. That evening, Daniel knelt at his window as he had for decades. The shutters were open, as they had always been. His face turned toward Jerusalem, as was his custom. His voice rose in familiar prayers, seeking God's blessing on the kingdom, protection for his people, and wisdom for the challenges ahead. The conspirators watched from hiding places across the street. They saw, he realized immediately that he had been manipulated, that his pride had been used as a weapon against his most faithful servant. The decree he had signed in vanity now threatened to destroy the man he valued most. But the law of the Medes and Persians could not be changed, even by the king who had made it. The rest of that day passed like a nightmare. Darius labored till sunset, seeking some legal loophole that might save Daniel's life. He consulted with lawyers and scholars, searched ancient precedents, and explored every possible escape. But the law stood firm, immutable as carved stone. As evening shadows lengthened, the accusers returned to the palace. Their voices carried the weight of inevitability. Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establishes may be changed. The trap was complete. Even royal power could not undo what royal pride had created. The fall of Babylon. The night was still and quiet when the waters began to drop. Along the banks of the Euphrates River, Persian engineers worked in silence, their shovels and picks redirecting the ancient flow. King Cyrus had planned his conquest with the patience of a master strategist. While Babylon feasted, his army prepared to walk where water once ran. The great city slept behind walls that had never been breached. These ramparts rose like cliffs from the desert floor, wide enough for chariots to race along their tops. Guard towers punctuated their length like stone sentinels, their watchmen confident in Babylon's impregnability. No army had ever taken the city by storm. Cyrus understood that force alone would not open Babylon's gates. The Persian king had studied his enemy with the care of a scholar, learning the city's strengths and weaknesses. The Euphrates flowed directly through Babylon's heart, providing water, but also creating a potential path for those clever enough to use it. His plan was elegant in its simplicity. Miles upstream from the city, Persian workers had dug channels and built dams. When the signal came, they would divert the river into new courses, lowering the water level within Babylon itself. The riverbed would become a highway for conquest. Inside the city, Belshazzar's feast continued in glorious oblivion. The sacred vessels gleamed in the lamplight, filled with wine and laughter. The mysterious writing on the wall had been interpreted, but its warning seemed distant as a half-remembered dream. Death felt impossible in a hall filled with such life and luxury. Daniel's words echoed in the king's memory like the tolling of a bell. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. But wine and music had a way of drowning out prophecy. The water level dropped foot by foot throughout the long night. Persian soldiers gathered at appointed places along the riverbank, waiting for the signal to advance. They had muffled their weapons and darkened their armor. This victory would be won by stealth, not strength. Babylon's river gates were massive bronze barriers that rose and fell with the water level. As the Euphrates receded, gaps appeared beneath these fortifications. What had been impossible became merely difficult. What had been impregnable became penetrable. The first Persian scouts slipped through the muddy gap like ghosts. They found themselves in the city's heart, surrounded by sleeping buildings and empty streets. Most citizens had no idea that enemy soldiers now walked among them. The conquest had begun without a battle cry or clash of arms. More soldiers followed, their numbers growing with each passing hour. They moved through Babylon's districts like a slow tide, securing key positions and surrounding important buildings. The palace quarter was isolated, the temple complex was surrounded. The city was being conquered from within. Dawn found Babylon changed forever. Persian banners flew from the walls where Babylonian eagles had perched for centuries. The gates stood open, their massive doors swinging freely for the first time in decades. Citizens emerged from their homes to find a new empire governing their streets. Cyrus entered his conquest with the dignity of a true king. No buildings were burned, no citizens were harmed. No treasures were looted for personal gain. The Persian king understood that empires were ruled by consent as much as force. His victory would be remembered for its mercy. The palace surrendered without resistance. Belshazzar had vanished in the night, perhaps killed in the confusion or fled to distant provinces. His courtiers knelt before the new ruler, offering their submission with the pragmatic wisdom of survivors. The feast hall stood empty, its golden vessels scattered like leaves. Royal scribes worked quickly to establish the new order. Decrees went out in multiple languages, assuring the people of Babylon that their lives would continue much as before. Persian law would replace Babylonian custom, but gradually and with respect for local traditions. Daniel was summoned to the palace in those first days of transition. The old prophet approached the throne room with measured steps, his white beard flowing like silk. He had served under Babylonian kings for 70 years. Now he would offer his wisdom to Persian rulers. Cyrus received him with the honor due to a sage. The Persian king had heard of Daniel's reputation for wisdom and integrity. He needed such men to help govern his vast empire, administrators who could be trusted with power and responsibility. The Hebrew prophet represented continuity in a time of change. Your God has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. Cyrus told Daniel, his words echoing ancient prophecies. He has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. The king's decree would soon permit the Hebrew exiles to return to their homeland, carrying with them treasures and hopes. The changeover was remarkably peaceful. Persian officials replaced Babylonian governors with quiet efficiency. New laws were published and explained. Trade routes remained open. Life in the great city continued its ancient rhythm, but under new management and with new possibilities. Babylon's fall marked the end of an era. For centuries, the city had been the center of the known world, its influence reaching from Egypt to India. Its scholars had mapped the stars and calculated the movements of planets. Its merchants had carried goods and ideas across continents. Its power had seemed eternal. Yet, like all earthly kingdoms, it had proven temporary. The walls that seemed impregnable had been bypassed. The waters that provided security had become highways for conquest. The pride that sustained its glory had blinded its leaders to approaching danger. In a single night, the world's greatest city had become a Persian province. The transition taught lessons that wise men would remember for generations. Empires rise and fall like waves on the shore. Walls cannot protect hearts hardened by pride. True security comes not from military might, but from divine favor. The God who raises up kingdoms can also bring them down. Babylon would continue to exist for centuries more, but never again as the center of world power. Its glory days were finished, its imperial dreams ended. The city that had once ruled nations would learn to serve new masters, accepting the changes that time and providence brought. Cyrus the gentle conqueror. In the year 5539 before Christ, as autumn winds whispered across the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, a different kind of conqueror approached Babylon's mighty walls. His name was Cyrus of Persia, and history would remember him not for the cities he burned or the peoples he enslaved, but for something far more unusual. He came as a liberator. The great gates of Babylon stood open. No siege engines thundered against the walls. No battering rams pounded the bronze-plated doors. Instead, Cyrus walked through the streets like a welcomed guest, his Persian robes flowing in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of date palms and river water. Babylon had fallen without a single arrow fired in anger. The city's priests had grown weary of their mad king Nabonidus, who spent his days worshipping the moon god Sin while neglecting Marduk, the patron deity of their beloved city. When Cyrus promised to honor their gods and restore their temples, the gates swung wide. The Persian king understood something that countless conquerors before him had missed. True power came not from crushing the spirit of a people, but from embracing their dreams. He walked through Babylon's markets, greeting merchants in their own tongue. He bowed before the statue of Marduk in the great temple, offering prayers as if he had been born beside the Euphrates. In the royal palace, where Nebuchadnezzar once interpreted dreams and Belshazzar saw ghostly writing on walls, Cyrus sat upon the throne with quiet dignity. He wore no crown of gold, demanded no tribute of silver. Instead, he called for his scribes and dictated words that would echo through centuries. I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, "Mighty king," the cylinder proclaimed in cuneiform script. But then came the revolutionary part. When I entered Babylon peacefully, I took up my lordly residence in the royal palace amid joy and happiness. I returned the sacred images of the gods to their sanctuaries. The cylinder spoke of freedom for the displaced peoples. Exiles could return to their homelands. Temples could be rebuilt. Ancient customs could be restored. It was a decree unlike any the world had seen, carved in clay and baked hard as stone. Persian soldiers walked the streets of Babylon not as occupiers, but as protectors. They helped rebuild shrines that had fallen into disrepair. They escorted families of exiles to the city gates, providing them with supplies for their journeys home. The empire Cyrus built would stretch from India to Greece, yet it ruled through respect rather than fear. In the evenings, as the sun painted the Euphrates golden, Cyrus would walk along the river's edge. Local fishermen nodded respectfully as he passed. Children played in the dusty streets, unafraid of the foreign king who spoke gently and kept his promises. This was conquest transformed into something beautiful. The hanging gardens still bloomed under Persian care. Water flowed through their terraces it had for centuries. The ziggurat of Marduk rose toward heaven, its steps worn smooth by countless pilgrims. Life in Babylon continued much as it always had, but with a new sense of hope. Cyrus established a new kind of empire, one that celebrated diversity rather than demanding uniformity. Local governors ruled according to ancient customs. Priests performed rituals in languages their fathers had spoken for 1,000 years. The Persian king had discovered that an empire of willing subjects was far stronger than one built on resentment and rebellion. Years passed peacefully in Babylon under Persian rule. The city remained prosperous, its canals flowing with clear water, its markets bustling with goods from across the known world. Caravans arrived from distant lands, bringing spices from India, silk from the Far East, precious stones from the mountains of Afghanistan. When Cyrus died in battle far from Babylon, defending his empire's distant borders, the city mourned him as they would a beloved father. His successors continued his gentle policies, understanding that their grandfather's wisdom had created something precious and rare. The Persian Empire would endure for 2 centuries, and much of its strength came from this moment when a conqueror chose compassion over cruelty. Cyrus had shown the world that true greatness lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to preserve and protect what was beautiful in human civilization. In Babylon's quiet temples, priests still offered prayers of gratitude for the king who had restored their sacred traditions. The city slept peacefully under Persian stars, dreaming of the gentle conqueror who had chosen to build bridges rather than walls. The return to Zion dawn broke softly over Babylon as families gathered their precious belongings, preparing for a journey that would carry them away from the only home many had ever known. After 70 years in exile, the people of Judah were finally free to return to Jerusalem. The decree of Cyrus had opened doors that seemed forever sealed. Along the dusty roads leading west from Babylon, a slow procession began to form. Wagons creaked under the weight of household goods, sacred vessels, and carefully wrapped scrolls containing the precious words of their faith. Children who had never seen the hills of Judea walked beside grandparents who remembered Solomon's temple in all its glory. The journey stretched nearly 1,000 miles across desert and mountain, river and plain. Each step carried them farther from the land where they had learned to sing the Lord's song in a strange place. Closer to the homeland their hearts had never forgotten. The road dust settled on their robes like a benediction, marking their passage from captivity to freedom. Zerubbabel led the first group of returning exiles, his name meaning seed of Babylon. He carried with him the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple decades earlier. These sacred objects had been carefully preserved in Babylonian treasuries, waiting for this moment of restoration. The Persian king had been generous beyond their wildest dreams. Not only were they free to leave, but they were given supplies for the journey and materials to rebuild their temple. Cyrus understood that a people restored to their ancestral home would become loyal subjects of his vast empire. As the caravan moved through the Syrian desert, older exiles shared stories of Jerusalem with younger generations. They described the temple's courtyards where priests had offered sacrifices, the streets where David had once walked, the hills where prophets had proclaimed God's word. These memories, kept alive through decades of longing, would soon become reality. The road was long and often difficult. Summer heat beat down mercilessly during the day, while nights brought desert cold that chilled to the bone. Wells were few and precious. Sandstorms forced them to shelter behind their wagons, waiting for the wind to calm. Yet spirits remained high, sustained by the promise of home. Some families chose to remain in Babylon. They had built lives along the rivers of Mesopotamia, established businesses, raised children who spoke Aramaic as easily as Hebrew. The exile had lasted 3 generations. For many, Babylon had become home in ways that Jerusalem could never be again. But thousands answered the call to return. They came from all walks of life, priests and Levites, ready to restore temple worship, craftsmen eager to rebuild the city's walls, farmers who dreamed of planting vineyards in the hills of Judah, teachers who carried the law in their hearts and scrolls in their packs. The caravan stretched for miles, a river of people flowing westward toward their ancestral home. Persian soldiers provided protection, ensuring safe passage through territories where bandits might otherwise have struck. This was Cyrus's gift to the returning exiles, a guarantee of safety on their journey to freedom. When they crested the final hill and saw Jerusalem spread before them, many wept. The city lay in ruins, its walls broken, its buildings crumbled. Weeds grew in the temple courtyards. Wild animals had made their homes in the rubble of once proud houses. Yet this was still the city of David, the place where God had chosen to dwell among his people. The work of rebuilding began immediately. Families cleared debris from ancient foundations, searching for building stones that could be used again. The altar was rebuilt first, allowing sacrifices to be offered even before the temple itself was restored. The sound of hammers and chisels rang out across the city as Jerusalem slowly came back to life. Not everyone welcomed their return. Local peoples who had settled in the land during the exile viewed the newcomers with suspicion. Political tensions arose as returning exiles claimed ancestral properties. The work of rebuilding was complicated by opposition from those who preferred the status quo. Yet the community persevered. Under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, who arrived in later waves of return, Jerusalem's walls were rebuilt and its temple restored. The city that had once been the jewel of David's kingdom began to shine again, though it would never quite recapture the glory of Solomon's day. Many of the returning exiles carried with them something precious beyond gold or silver. They brought scrolls containing the writings of prophets who had sustained their faith during the dark years of exile. Isaiah's words of comfort, Jeremiah's promises of restoration, Ezekiel's visions of a new temple. These texts would form the heart of the Hebrew Bible, preserving for all time the story of exile and return. The Persian Empire made this return possible, but it was faith that sustained the journey. The belief that God had not forgotten his people, that promises made in ancient times would be fulfilled, that home was not just a place, but a calling. The return to Zion became a pattern of hope that would echo through centuries whenever people found themselves far from home and longing for restoration. Babylon. After the empire, the great city settled into a gentler rhythm as the Persian Empire matured around it. No longer the capital of the world, Babylon became something perhaps more precious, a place where cultures met and mingled like tributaries flowing into a great river. The ancient walls still stood strong, but they enclosed a different kind of kingdom now. Persian administrators governed from the palace where Nebuchadnezzar once dreamed his troubling dreams. They wore different robes and spoke a different language, but they treated the city with respect. The temples remained active, their priests still performing rituals that stretched back to the dawn of civilization. Marduk's ziggurat continued to rise toward heaven, a stairway of brick and ancient prayers. Babylonian scholars found new purpose under Persian rule. The great library collections, written in cuneiform on countless clay tablets, became treasures sought by learned men from across the empire. Students came from distant provinces to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law in the schools that had flourished here for over 1,000 years. The Hanging Gardens, if they truly existed, probably reached their most magnificent form during these peaceful years. Persian gardeners, masters of irrigation and landscape design, would have understood and appreciated such an ambitious project. Water flowed through carefully designed channels, nourishing exotic plants from across the known world. Trade flourished as never before. The Persian royal road connected Babylon to Persepolis and beyond, carrying merchants and their goods in both directions. Silk from distant China passed through Babylonian markets. Spices from India perfumed the air around the trading posts. Gold from Lydia jingled in the purses of wealthy citizens. The city's reputation for learning attracted scholars from Greece, Egypt, and other centers of civilization. They came to study the astronomical observations that Babylonian priests had been recording for centuries. The movements of planets, the cycles of eclipses, the intricate dance of celestial bodies, all carefully noted and preserved in the temple archives. Babylonian mathematics influenced thinkers throughout the Persian Empire. The base 60 number system, which gave us 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles, spread along the trade routes. Young mathematicians learned to solve complex problems using methods developed beside the Euphrates centuries earlier. The old tensions between conquered and conqueror gradually faded. Intermarriage became common. Persian nobles married into Babylonian families, while Babylonian merchants established themselves in Persepolis and other Persian cities. The empire's strength came from this blending of traditions and talents. Religious life adapted to the new reality. The ancient gods of Babylon continued to receive offerings and prayers, but they shared the city with Persian deities and the beliefs of other subject peoples. This religious tolerance, revolutionary for its time, created a peaceful coexistence that few empires have achieved. Cyrus's successors maintained his policies of respect for local customs. Darius the Great visited Babylon several times, participating in religious festivals and consulting with local officials. The city remained prosperous and content, a jewel in the Persian crown rather than a conquered prize. The famous Ishtar Gate, with its brilliant blue tiles and golden animals, welcomed visitors from across the known world. Travelers wrote of their amazement at the city's beauty and wealth. Babylon had become a symbol of what could be achieved when different peoples worked together in harmony. As decades passed, the memories of independence faded. Younger generations of Babylonians grew up as Persian citizens, serving in the imperial administration and military. Some rose to high positions, advising kings and governing provinces. The city's talent for administration, developed over centuries of empire, found new expression in Persian service. The great festivals continued much as they always had. The New Year celebration, when Marduk's statue was carried through the streets in solemn procession, drew crowds from across the empire. The king himself sometimes participated, honoring the ancient traditions that had made Babylon great. Evening brought a special magic to the city. Lamps flickered in windows throughout the residential districts. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted from rooftop gardens. Children played in courtyards while their parents discussed the day's business. The river reflected the lights of the city, creating a second Babylon in the dark water. Persian Babylon was perhaps the most cosmopolitan city the world had yet seen. A dozen languages could be heard in its markets. Restaurants served foods from every corner of the empire. Temples honored gods from distant lands. It was a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared. This golden age of cultural fusion would last for 2 centuries, creating a model of tolerance and cooperation that future empires would struggle to match. Babylon had found a new kind of greatness, not as a conqueror, but as a bridge between worlds. Alexander's final breath. The young king who had conquered the world arrived in Babylon on a spring day in 323 before Christ, his body already failing, though his spirit burned as bright as ever. Alexander of Macedon had marched his armies from the hills of Greece to the shores of India, claiming victory after victory. Yet now he sought rest in the ancient city that had seen so many empires rise and fall. Babylon welcomed him as it had welcomed conquerors before. The great gates swung open, the priests offered prayers, the people lined the streets to see this golden-haired youth who had humbled the mighty Persian Empire. But Alexander came not as a destroyer, but as a dreamer, planning to make Babylon the capital of his new world empire. The palace that had housed Nebuchadnezzar and Persian kings now echoed with Greek voices. Alexander's companions, men who had followed him across half the world, explored the ancient corridors with wonder. They marveled at the hanging gardens, studied the star charts in the temples, walked the walls that had protected the city for over 1,000 years. Plans sprouted in Alexander's restless mind like flowers after rain. He would rebuild the great ziggurat of Marduk, making it even more magnificent than before. New harbors would be dug to accommodate ships from his growing fleet. Roads would connect Babylon to every corner of his vast empire. The city would become the hub of a wheel that spanned the known world. But the young king's body, pushed beyond endurance by years of constant campaigning, began to betray his grand ambitions. Fever struck him down in the palace halls where ancient kings had once held court. The physicians could do nothing. The man who had defeated armies could not defeat the invisible enemy that burned within his blood. As Alexander lay dying in the royal chambers, his generals gathered around his bed like carrion birds. Already they were dividing his empire among themselves, each claiming a piece of the world he had conquered. The unity he had imposed through force of personality would shatter the moment he drew his last breath. The city held its breath as news of the king's conditions spread through the streets. Babylonians had seen many rulers come and go, but this one was different. He had promised to make their city the greatest in the world. He had married a Persian princess in a grand ceremony here, symbolically uniting East and West. His death would leave those dreams unfulfilled. Alexander's final words, according to legend, were given when asked who should inherit his empire. "The strongest," he whispered, though some claimed he said Craterus, the name of one of his most trusted generals. The ambiguity would lead to decades of warfare as his successors fought over the spoils of his conquests. The great conqueror died on the 10th day of June in the 33rd year of his life. His body was placed in a golden sarcophagus, though his generals would later fight over even this final resting place. The empire he had built through 13 years of constant warfare began to fragment before his funeral was complete. Babylon witnessed the strange spectacle of grown men weeping over the death of a foreign king. Alexander's soldiers, who had followed him faithfully across deserts and mountains, mourned like children who had lost their father. Without his charismatic leadership, they were just mercenaries far from home. The city's priests performed the ancient rituals for a dead king, though Alexander had ruled Babylon for less than 2 years. They recognized something in him that transcended nationality or culture. He had possessed the quality that the Babylonians called malamo, the divine radiance that marked a true king. In the days following Alexander's death, his generals carved up his empire like merchants dividing goods at market. Babylon fell to Seleucus, one of his most capable commanders, who would establish a dynasty that ruled Mesopotamia for over 2 centuries. The city's fate was decided by ambitious men who saw it as a prize to be claimed rather than a home to be cherished. Yet something of Alexander's dream survived in Babylon. The fusion of Greek and Persian cultures that he had promoted continued under his successors. Babylonian astronomers studied Greek geometry. Greek sculptors learned Mesopotamian techniques. The city became a melting pot where East met West in ways that enriched both traditions. The palace where Alexander died became a place of pilgrimage for his followers. They came to pay their respects and to remember the man who had dreamed of uniting the world under one crown. His death marked the end of one age and the beginning of another, as the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from his empire began their own chapters in history. Babylon had been witness to the death of many great rulers, but none quite like Alexander. He had arrived as a conqueror but died as a dreamer, his grand plans unfulfilled, but his vision of cultural unity destined to influence the world for centuries to come. The ancient city, which had seen the rise and fall of so many empires, quietly prepared to outlast yet another dynasty. As night fell over the Euphrates on the day of Alexander's death, the river continued its eternal flow toward the sea. Babylon had survived Assyrians and Persians, and it would survive Greeks as well. The city's true strength had never been in its armies, but in its ability to adapt, to endure, to transform conquerors into citizens. Alexander's death was not an ending, but another beginning in the long story of this remarkable place. The tower that touched heaven. In the morning mist of ancient days, When the world was young and men's hearts burned with impossible ambitions, there stood a tower that reached toward the stars. The builders called it Etemenanki, which meant house of the foundation of heaven and earth. But the world would remember it by another name, the Tower of Babel. The story begins with a people who spoke one language and shared one dream. They had wandered across the earth after the Great Flood, searching for a place to call home. When they reached the plain of Shinar, beside the flowing waters of the Euphrates, they decided to settle. The soil was rich, the water sweet, and the flat lands stretched endlessly toward every horizon. "Come," they said to one another, "let us make bricks and build ourselves a city." They had learned to shape clay into rectangular blocks, baking them hard in great furnaces. These bricks would be stronger than any stone, more uniform than any timber. With such materials, they believed they could build anything their minds could imagine. But a city was not enough for hearts filled with such ambition. "Let us build a tower," they declared, "whose top may reach unto heaven." They dreamed of a structure so tall that its peak would touch the dwelling place of the gods. Through this tower, they would make a name for themselves and ensure they would never be scattered across the earth again. Work began at dawn each day as the sun painted the eastern sky gold. Thousands of laborers carried bricks up the rising ramps, each one laid with care and precision. The tower grew slowly but steadily, casting an ever longer shadow across the surrounding city. Children played in that shadow, their voices echoing up the massive walls. The builders organized themselves into crews, each responsible for a section of the construction. Master craftsmen directed the work, consulting plans drawn on clay tablets. Engineers calculated the stress and weight, ensuring the foundation could support the tremendous load. The project consumed the energies of an entire civilization. As the tower rose higher, the workers began to change. Pride crept into their hearts like poison in a well. They began to believe that nothing was impossible for them, that they could challenge heaven itself. The tower became not just a monument to human achievement, but a symbol of human arrogance. Years passed, and the tower reached heights that no building had ever achieved. From its upper levels, workers could see farther than any human had seen before. Rivers appeared as silver threads, cities looked like children's toys. The curve of the earth itself became visible on clear days. But as the tower climbed toward heaven, the unity of its builders began to crack. Disputes arose over methods and materials. Different groups developed their own ways of speaking about the work. What had begun as one language slowly divided into dialects, then into separate tongues entirely. The confusion grew worse with each passing day. Workers could no longer understand their supervisors. Engineers could not explain their plans to the laborers. The careful coordination that had made the tower possible dissolved into chaos and misunderstanding. The great project ground to a halt. God looked down upon the tower and the people who built it. He saw their pride, their desire to make themselves equal to the divine. "Behold," he said, "the people are one, and they have all one language. Nothing will be impossible for them." The unity that could have achieved great good was being corrupted by limitless ambition. So the Lord scattered the languages of the earth, confusing the speech of the builders. Where once there had been one people with one purpose, now there were many tribes speaking many tongues. They could no longer work together on their great project. The tower stood unfinished, a monument to both human ambition and human limitation. The people abandoned their great tower and scattered across the earth, taking their new languages with them. Some went north into the mountains, others south toward the sea. They built new cities and established new nations, but they never again attempted to build a tower to heaven. The abandoned tower stood for centuries, slowly crumbling as wind and rain wore away its carefully laid bricks. Local people called it Babel, meaning confusion, remembering the day when language itself became a barrier between human hearts. Birds nested in its crevices, and vines grew up its walls. Yet the tower's story lived on, passed down through generations in the languages that had been born from its confusion. Every culture that heard the tale understood its message. Human achievement is precious, but human pride is dangerous. The desire to reach heaven is noble, but only if it comes from humility rather than arrogance. In Babylon, where the ancient tower was said to have stood, People built new ziggurats that also reached toward heaven. But these were temples, not monuments to human pride. They were stairways for the gods to descend to earth, not ladders for mortals to climb to heaven. The lesson of Babel had been learned. The story of the Tower of Babel became one of humanity's great cautionary tales. It reminded people that unity is a gift to be cherished, that communication is a blessing to be protected, and that the highest human achievements come not from pride, but from cooperation guided by wisdom. Even today, when travelers see the ruins of ancient ziggurats rising from the desert sands, they remember the story of the tower that touched heaven. It stands as a reminder that human dreams are most beautiful when they acknowledge the divine mystery that lies beyond our reach. Echoes in Revelation. In the final book of the Christian Bible, written on the rocky island of Patmos by an exile named John, Babylon returns as a vision wrapped in mystery and dread. But this is not the historical city of Nebuchadnezzar or Cyrus. This is Babylon transformed into symbol, a spiritual empire that spans the world yet carries the seeds of its own destruction. The Apostle John, banished to his island prison for preaching about Jesus, received visions that lifted him beyond the boundaries of time and space. In these revelations, he saw a woman clothed in purple and scarlet, sitting upon a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon her forehead was written a name, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. This Babylon was not built of brick and mortar, but of human pride and spiritual rebellion. She was drunk with the wine of her fornication, corrupting the kings of the earth with her seductive power. Merchants grew rich through her excessive luxuries, while the poor suffered in her shadow. She was everything that the ancient city had once represented to its enemies: wealth built on oppression, beauty hiding inner corruption. John watched in his vision as this symbolic Babylon held a golden cup filled with abominations. The cup gleamed in the light, attracting all who saw it, but its contents were poison to the soul. This was the intoxication of worldly power, the false promise that material wealth could satisfy spiritual hunger. The beast that carried Babylon was covered with blasphemous names, representing the political and economic systems that enable such corruption. Its 7 heads symbolized the hills of Rome, making it clear that John was speaking about the imperial system of his own day. Yet the vision reached beyond any single empire to encompass all forms of worldly power that set themselves against God. An angel revealed to John the meaning of his vision. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues, the angel explained. Babylon's power came not from military might alone, but from her ability to seduce entire populations into worshiping wealth, comfort, and earthly success rather than seeking spiritual truth. But this symbolic Babylon carried within herself the promise of her own downfall. The beast that carries her will hate her, the angel prophesied. They will make her desolate and naked, will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. The very forces that enabled her corruption would eventually turn against her, consuming what they had once supported. John saw a mighty angel take up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, "Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all." The vision spoke of sudden, complete destruction, not gradual decline, but catastrophic collapse. The lament that followed was one of the most haunting passages in all of Scripture. "Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city," cried the kings of the earth as they watched her burn. "For in 1 hour is thy judgment come." The merchants wept as they saw their source of wealth disappear in smoke and flame. Even the sailors and sea captains mourned, crying out when they saw the smoke of her burning, "What city is like unto this great city?" They cast dust on their heads and wailed, for their livelihood had depended on her prosperity. In 1 hour, such great riches had come to nothing. But not everyone mourned Babylon's fall. A voice from heaven cried, "Rejoice over her, you heavens, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her." Those who had suffered under her oppression celebrated her destruction as divine justice finally fulfilled. The vision then shifted to show what would replace fallen Babylon. John saw a new Jerusalem descending from heaven like a bride adorned for her husband. This city needed no temple, for God himself would dwell there. No sun or moon would light it, for the glory of the Lamb would be its illumination. The contrast could not have been clearer. Where Babylon represented human pride and rebellion, the New Jerusalem embodied divine grace and restoration. Where Babylon corrupted through her wealth and power, the New Jerusalem healed through the river of life flowing from God's throne. This prophetic use of Babylon's name ensured that the ancient city would live forever in human memory, not just as a historical place, but as a spiritual concept. Throughout Christian history, believers would apply the name Babylon to any system that seemed to embody worldly pride in opposition to God's kingdom. The Babylon of Revelation was both specific and universal. It spoke to John's contemporaries about the Roman Empire that oppressed them, but it also spoke to future generations about every form of spiritual corruption that would arise. The name became a lens through which believers could understand the ongoing conflict between the kingdom of God and the kingdoms of this world. In quiet moments, as the Mediterranean waves lapped against the shores of Patmos, John must have reflected on the visions he had received. The historical Babylon had fallen centuries earlier, but its spiritual legacy lived on in new forms. His apocalyptic writing ensured that the city's name would continue to echo through time, a perpetual warning about the seductive danger of power without humility, wealth without justice, and human achievement without divine blessing. Archaeologists in the dust. In the quiet heat of an Iraqi morning, dust swirls around careful hands holding delicate brushes. The year is 1899, and a German team led by Robert Koldewey begins to uncover what had been sleeping beneath centuries of sand. They don't know it yet, but they're about to wake Babylon from its long slumber. The tells, those gentle hills that dot the landscape, hide more than earth and stone. Each layer holds whispers of different ages. Koldewey's team works slowly, methodically, as archaeologists do. They understand that rushing would destroy the very stories they've come to hear. The first discoveries emerge like dreams becoming real. Pieces of glazed brick, brilliant blue, even after 2,500 years. The diggers pause, brush away more sand, and see the outline of something magnificent. It's a wall, but not just any wall. The colors shine through the dirt like jewels waiting to be cleaned. Month by month, season by season, the shape of ancient Babylon reveals itself. The famous Ishtar Gate emerges from its earthen bed, each blue brick painted with golden animals that seem to pace eternally along the walls. Lions, bulls, and dragons march in perfect rows, their eyes still bright with ancient fire. But archaeology moves at the pace of patience. Each fragment must be cataloged, each layer mapped and photographed. The German team creates detailed drawings, takes careful measurements, records every discovery in neat handwriting. They know they're holding pieces of stories that kings and prophets once lived. The ziggurat foundations appear next, massive and square, rising from the desert floor like the base of some forgotten mountain. Workers clear away tons of accumulated sand and debris. What they find amazes them. The tower that may have inspired the tale of Babel, its bricks still fitted together with ancient precision. Cuneiform tablets emerge by the thousands. Most are business records, lists of grain and sheep, payments and debts. But others contain poetry, prayers, and royal chronicles. Each tablet represents hours of careful work by long-dead scribes, their wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay when the world was young. The excavation reveals Babylon's double walls, those mighty fortifications that once made the city seem unconquerable. Archaeologists measure their thickness, trace their path around the ancient city limits. They find gates buried beneath rubble, streets paved with baked brick, foundations of houses where families once gathered in the evening light. French archaeologist André Perrault continues the work decades later, uncovering Mari, one of Babylon's rival cities. His discoveries fill in more pieces of the puzzle. Palace walls covered in frescoes, diplomatic letters between ancient kings, treasure rooms that held golden cups and silver jewelry. The 20th century brings new challenges. Wars interrupt the careful work. Political tensions make excavation difficult. But the archaeologists return when they can, drawn by the promise of more discoveries waiting beneath the sand. Modern techniques transform the work. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures without disturbing the earth above them. Computer mapping creates detailed plans of the ancient city. Carbon dating provides precise ages for organic materials found in the ruins. The artifacts travel to museums around the world. The Pergamon Museum in Berlin displays a reconstructed Ishtar Gate, its blue walls rising in a climate controlled hall. Visitors walk through the same gateway that once welcomed Babylonian kings and foreign ambassadors. Each discovery adds another voice to Babylon's chorus: a child's toy found in a house cellar, a woman's jewelry buried in a courtyard, a soldier's spear point lodged in a city wall. These small finds often tell bigger stories than the grand monuments. The work continues today, though more carefully than before. Modern archaeologists understand that excavation destroys even as it reveals. They leave portions of sites untouched, knowing that future techniques might extract information that current methods would miss. Digital archaeology now preserves discoveries in ways Koldewey could never have imagined. Three-dimensional scans capture every detail of artifacts. Virtual reality reconstructions let people walk through Babylon as it might have looked in Nebuchadnezzar's time. The dust still swirls on quiet mornings around the ruins. New discoveries wait beneath layers of earth and time. Each season brings possibilities. Another tablet, another wall, another piece of the vast puzzle that was ancient Babylon. The archaeologists work on, patient as the desert itself, knowing that every careful brushstroke brings us closer to understanding the people who once called this place home. Their tools are simple: brushes, trowels, screens for sifting sand, but their mission connects us across the centuries to voices that refuse to be forgotten. In museums and universities, scholars continue translating the tablets, deciphering royal inscriptions, piecing together the daily lives of ancient Babylonians. Each translation reveals new details about how they lived, what they believed, what they feared and hoped for. The work of archaeology is slow, methodical, reverent. It requires the patience of a gardener and the precision of a surgeon. But the rewards are immeasurable: the recovery of lost worlds, the resurrection of forgotten voices, the bridge between then and now that helps us understand who we are and where we came from. Saddam's New Babylon. In the 1980s, under the burning sun of modern Iraq, an unusual construction project begins near the ancient ruins. Workers arrive with modern equipment, but their task seems pulled from history itself. They're rebuilding Babylon brick by brick, on the orders of a dictator who sees himself as the heir to Nebuchadnezzar. Saddam Hussein has grand visions dancing in his head. He imagines himself as the new king of Babylon, restoring the glory of ancient Mesopotamia under his rule. The project becomes his obsession, a monument to his own perceived greatness, built on top of actual monuments from the past. The reconstruction begins with the palace complex. New walls rise alongside ancient foundations, but these walls tell a different story. Every few rows of traditional brick, workers insert modern bricks stamped with Saddam's name and the date. It's as if the dictator wants to ensure that future archaeologists will know exactly who rebuilt this place. The new palace gleams with marble floors and air conditioning, a strange mixture of ancient ambition and modern comfort. Saddam holds meetings here, receives foreign dignitaries in rooms overlooking the ruins of the genuine Babylon. The contrast is jarring. Power suits and briefcases in halls where cuneiform tablets once recorded the business of kings. Local workers find the project both fascinating and troubling. They're building on top of real archaeological sites, covering actual ancient remains with modern concrete and plaster. Professional archaeologists watch in dismay as bulldozers move through areas that haven't been properly excavated, destroying evidence that took millennia to accumulate. The reconstruction follows no historical accuracy. Walls appear where no walls existed in ancient times. Buildings rise in architectural styles that never graced the original city. It's Babylon filtered through one man's fantasy of what a great ruler's capital should look like. Gardens are planted where Saddam believes the Hanging Gardens might have stood. Palm trees and flowering bushes create shade and beauty, but they're arranged according to modern landscaping principles rather than any ancient design. Fountains splash and gurgle, fed by electric pumps rather than the ingenious hydraulic systems the Babylonians might have used. The ziggurat receives special attention. Workers build a new structure over the ancient foundations, creating a stepped pyramid that rises dramatically from the desert floor. It looks impressive from a distance, but up close, the modern materials and construction techniques are obvious. The bricks are too uniform, the mortar too perfect, the angles too precise for something genuinely ancient. Saddam commissions murals for the interior walls. These depict scenes from Babylonian history, but they're painted in a socialist realist style more appropriate to Soviet propaganda than ancient art. Nebuchadnezzar looks suspiciously like Saddam himself in some of the paintings, a not so subtle suggestion about who the real heir to Babylon's legacy might be. The Ishtar Gate gets reconstructed as well, though not on its original site. The new gate stands at the entrance to the palace complex, its blue bricks and golden animals gleaming in the desert sun. But the proportions are wrong, the colors too bright, the details simplified. It's like a theme park version of the real thing. International archaeological organizations protest the project. UNESCO expresses concern about damage to the actual ancient site. Scholars write letters and articles explaining how the reconstruction is harming our understanding of the real Babylon. But construction continues regardless. The project employs hundreds of local workers, providing jobs in a region where work is often scarce. Many of the craftsmen take pride in their skill, even if they question the project's wisdom. They learn traditional brickmaking techniques, practice ancient construction methods, develop expertise in working with clay and mortar. Saddam hosts festivals at his new Babylon, complete with performers in historical costumes and banquets served on replica ancient dinnerware. The events feel like historical reenactments crossed with political rallies. Guests praise the vision and ambition while privately wondering about the strange mixture of archaeology and propaganda. The palace becomes a working government facility. Ministers hold meetings in rooms decorated with reproductions of ancient Babylonian art. Bureaucrats shuffle papers in offices overlooking reconstructed ziggurats. It's a surreal blend of ancient grandeur and modern bureaucracy. Tourism to the site increases, though visitors often struggle to distinguish between the genuine ancient remains and Saddam's additions. Tour guides develop careful explanations about which walls are 2,500 years old and which were built during the reign of Iraq's modern king. The Iran-Iraq War interrupts construction at times, but work resumes when conditions allow. The project becomes a matter of national pride for some Iraqis, a symbol of their connection to the glorious civilizations that once flourished in their homeland. Archaeological damage from the reconstruction proves extensive. Ancient walls are covered with modern additions. Original foundations disappear beneath new structures. Context that took centuries to create gets destroyed in months of construction activity. The reconstruction remains unfinished when Saddam's regime ends in 2003. Construction equipment sits abandoned in the desert. Half-completed walls stand like broken teeth against the sky. The dream of a new Babylon fades as quickly as it began. What remains is a strange monument to ambition and ego, a place where genuine ancient history mixes uneasily with modern political theater. The site continues to draw visitors, but now they come to see both the real Babylon and the peculiar legacy of a dictator who tried to make himself its inheritor. The city sleeps once more. Today, if you visit Babylon, you'll find a place where silence has returned. The tour buses that once brought visitors to Saddam's reconstruction come less frequently now. The guards who once watched over the palace complex have moved on to other duties. The ancient city settles back into the quiet rhythms of the desert. Goats wander through courtyards where kings once held council. Their hoofbeats echo softly on stones that witnessed the rise and fall of empires. A shepherd leads his small flock past walls built by Nebuchadnezzar, past gates where Daniel might have walked, past foundations that supported the dreams of the mighty. The Euphrates still flows nearby, though its course has shifted over the centuries. The river that gave birth to civilization continues its patient journey toward the sea, carrying silt and stories in equal measure. Date palms line its banks, their fronds rustling in the warm breeze like whispered conversations between past and present. Local families sometimes picnic among the ruins on Friday afternoons. Children play hide-and-seek behind ancient walls while their parents spread blankets on ground that once echoed with the footsteps of prophets and poets. Their laughter mingles with the desert wind, adding new voices to a place that has heard so many voices across the ages. The reconstructed portions of Saddam's Babylon are showing their age. Paint peels from walls that were meant to last forever. Cracks appear in concrete that seemed so solid when first poured. Nature begins the slow process of reclaiming what humans tried to rebuild, just as it reclaimed the original city centuries ago. Archaeological work continues, but at a careful pace. International teams return when security conditions allow, armed with new technologies and old patience. They work to separate the genuine ancient remains from the modern additions, trying to understand what Babylon was really like before politics and ego complicated the picture. The Site Museum, housed in one of Saddam's palace buildings, displays artifacts found during decades of excavation. Clay tablets covered with cuneiform writing sit in climate-controlled cases, their wedge-shaped marks still sharp after millennia. Jewelry, weapons, and household items tell stories of daily life in the world's first great city. Village women sometimes come to collect herbs that grow wild among the ruins. They know which plants are good for cooking, which ones help with headaches, which ones their grandmothers used for dyeing wool. Their knowledge connects them to generations of women who gathered plants in this same soil when Babylon was alive and bustling. The tourist infrastructure that once supported thousands of visitors has largely disappeared. Hotels stand empty, their rooms filled only with dust and memories of busier times. Restaurant owners in nearby towns speak wistfully of the days when archaeologists and visitors provided steady business. Security concerns keep many international visitors away, though local Iraqi families continue to visit. They bring their children to see where their ancestors built one of humanity's first great civilizations. The pride in their eyes mixes with sadness at seeing such an important place so quiet and neglected. Bedouin occasionally camp near the ruins during their seasonal migrations. They pitch their black tents in the desert around Babylon, their camels grazing on scrub brush that grows between ancient foundations. At night, their cooking fires cast dancing shadows on walls built when the world was young. The famous Ishtar Gate, both the reconstructed version and the original ruins, stands patient in the desert light. The blue-glazed bricks still catch the sun, their color as vibrant as ever. Lions and dragons march eternally along the walls, frozen in glazed clay, witnesses to the passing of empires and the endurance of art. Sunrise and sunset bring special beauty to the ruins. The low-angled light picks out details invisible during the harsh glare of midday. Shadows define the shapes of walls and courtyards, giving temporary form to spaces that once bustled with life. The desert reveals its subtle colors, dozens of shades of brown and gold and red. Rain, when it comes, transforms the site completely. The usually dusty ground darkens and releases the sweet smell of wet earth. Puddles form in courtyards and reflect the sky, creating temporary mirrors that double the height of ancient walls. Steam rises from sun-warmed stones, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Birds nest in crevices between ancient bricks. Their songs add life to the quiet ruins, a reminder that nature continues its cycles regardless of human ambitions. Lizards sun themselves on walls built by Hammurabi's architects, their quick movements the only motion in otherwise still courtyards. The night sky above Babylon remains spectacular, unpolluted by city lights. The same stars that guided Babylonian astronomers still wheel overhead. The constellations they named and mapped continue their ancient dance, indifferent to the rise and fall of the civilizations that first learned to read their movements. Local guards make their rounds quietly, more protectors than enforcers. They know every stone, every wall, every corner of the site. Some have worked here for decades, watching seasons change and visitors come and go. Their presence ensures that Babylon remains safe, even in its sleep. The silence of modern Babylon is profound, but not empty. It's filled with possibility, with the weight of history, with the patient endurance of stones that have witnessed more human drama than any other place on earth. The city sleeps, but like all sleepers, it dreams. Babylon in our dreams. As darkness settles over the ancient ruins and modern cities alike, Babylon lives on in places that exist beyond geography and time. It breathes in the pages of holy books, stirs in the hearts of poets, and whispers through the collective memory of humanity. The physical city may sleep beneath Iraqi sand, but its soul wanders freely through our dreams and stories. In synagogues around the world, voices still chant the words written by exiles who sat by Babylon's rivers. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat and wept. The psalm echoes in Jerusalem and New York, in Buenos Aires and Mumbai, wherever people gather to remember how sorrow can transform into hope. The Hebrew words carry the weight of ancient tears and the lightness of eventual redemption. Churches preserve their own Babylonian memories. In stained glass windows, Daniel stands calm among the lions while colored light streams across the faces of worshippers. Children learn the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, finding courage in the tale of three young men who refused to bow down. The fiery furnace becomes a symbol of faith tested and found pure. Artists across centuries have painted their visions of Babylon. Peter Bruegel's Tower of Babel spirals impossibly toward heaven, its architecture a mixture of Roman grandeur and Gothic fantasy. John Martin's dramatic canvases show the city in apocalyptic splendor, with lightning splitting dark skies above ziggurats that gleam like jewels. Each artist adds their own dreams to Babylon's endless story. Musicians hear Babylon's rhythms in their compositions. Verdi's Hebrew slaves sing of their homeland while working in Babylonian fields, their chorus one of opera's most moving laments. Bob Marley transforms the biblical imagery into reggae poetry, singing of Babylon as a symbol of oppression that must someday fall. The city's name carries different meanings for different voices, but it never loses its power to inspire. Writers find in Babylon a perfect metaphor for human ambition and its consequences. Science fiction authors imagine future Babylons among the stars, great cities that rise and fall on distant worlds. Fantasy novelists create magical kingdoms that echo the ancient city's grandeur and hubris. The patterns repeat because the story of Babylon touches something deep in human nature. In the digital age, Babylon finds new life in video games and virtual worlds. Players build their own versions of the ancient city, complete with hanging gardens and towering ziggurats. They take on the roles of Hammurabi or Nebuchadnezzar, making decisions that shape the destiny of virtual civilizations. The city becomes interactive, responsive to choices made by people sitting at computers thousands of miles and years away from the original. Children still hear Babylonian stories at bedtime. Parents read picture books about the brave prophet in the lion's den, about the proud king who became humble, about the tower that tried to reach too high. The stories teach lessons about courage, humility, and the dangers of pride. They plant seeds that may bloom into deeper understanding years later. Scholars continue to study Babylon not just as an ancient city, but as an idea that has shaped human thinking. They trace its influence through literature and law, through art and architecture, through the development of urban civilization itself. Academic conferences bring together experts who debate Babylonian influence on everything from modern city planning to contemporary legal systems. The city appears in dreams, both sleeping and waking. Archaeologists dream of perfect excavations that reveal all of Babylon's secrets. Believers dream of walking with Daniel through palace corridors. Artists dream of seeing the hanging gardens in full bloom, their terraces cascading with flowers and running water. Each dreamer adds their vision to the city's endless resurrection. Modern Baghdad, built near ancient Babylon's ruins, carries forward something of the old city's spirit. Its markets buzz with the energy of commerce that once filled Babylonian streets. Its scholars continue the tradition of learning that made ancient Babylon a center of knowledge. The river that flows through both cities connects past and present with liquid threads. Babylon lives in the patterns we repeat without realizing. Every time we build a city, we echo Ur and Babylon. Every time we create laws, we follow paths first traced by Hammurabi. Every time we reach for the stars, literally or figuratively, we repeat the gesture of the tower builders. The city's DNA runs through human civilization. In quiet moments, when the day's noise fades and night settles around us, Babylon whispers from the spaces between memory and imagination. It reminds us that all earthly cities are temporary, that all human achievements will someday sleep beneath the sand of time. But it also suggests that something endures beyond the physical. The stories we tell, the dreams we share, the hope that even broken things can be made beautiful again. The city appears differently to each person who encounters it. To some, it represents the dangers of unchecked power. To others, it symbolizes the heights human creativity can reach. To many, it offers both warnings and inspiration, showing how civilizations rise through cooperation and fall through pride. Babylon continues to build itself in human hearts, one story at a time, one dream at a time, one quiet moment of reflection at a time. The ancient city by the river has become eternal, not through the permanence of its stones, but through the persistence of human memory and imagination. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of walking through Babylon's gates, hearing the whisper of wind through ruined walls, seeing stars wheel overhead just as they did when the city was young. In dreams, all cities are possible, all stories true, all endings open to hope. The ancient city sleeps, but it never stops dreaming. And in its dreams, it sees all the Babylons yet to come, all the towers yet to rise, all the gardens yet to bloom in the patient desert of human time.